Chapter 842. It's not convenient to keep long hair in the military camp, mainly because it's inconvenient to wash it after being stained with blood, so I just cut it off. Speaking of which, it's a lot darker and there are a lot of scars. It's so ugly. Situilan rubbed her hair and said helplessly. Although she had changed a lot in the military camp, everyone loved beauty, not to mention that she was a woman after all. Ning Ke looked at her playful appearance and felt very gentle. He said, "In my eyes, you are the most beautiful now, more beautiful than ever before." Situilan said, "You don't have to say such words to make me happy." Ning Ke smiled and did not explain. He said, "What are you going to do next?" Situilan said, "The military ministry is going to send me to Gushan Commandery." As soon as she said this, the room became much quieter. Ning Ke knew the intention of the imperial court to send her to Gushan Commandery. It was to use General Yunhui's prestige in the army to divide and conquer the Hua family's power in the army. After all, Hua Shangyue was dead. Li Yu was very grateful to the Hua family and had to do this work. Situilan returned from the northern borderline and knew more about the inside story of Hua Shanyue's death than anyone else. She knew that Ning Ke had something to do with it, but she did not say anything. Instead, she said, "I want to see Her Highness." "She doesn't want to see you?" Ning Ke was a little surprised. With the status of General Yunhui's mansion and the relationship between Situilan and Li Yu, it should be very easy for her to see the palace. Situilan nodded. Ning Ke did not expect that Li Yu was more autistic than he imagined. After a moment of silence, he said, "I'll give you an ID token. You go to the palace by yourself at night and talk to her more." It was a gathering of the academy's classmates, and in this situation, naturally there were no dancers to accompany them. But the scene was still very lively. Ning Ke went to the top floor to see Mistress Jian. Dewdrop made a bowl of glutinous rice balls and placed it on the table in front of him. Then, she naturally sat beside him and held his arm. Even when Mistress Jian frowned slightly, she still smiled and refused to let go. She had long been removed from the register, but she was still used to living in the building. Naturally, she was not as respectful to Mistress Jian as she was in the past. However, Ning Ke could only take the comfort of her warmth as a test. Xiao Chao stood behind Mistress Jian and snorted angrily. As time went by, the little girl had grown up, especially after Mistress Jian handed over the management of the song and dance troupe to her. She had matured even more quickly. Although there was still a trace of childishness between her eyebrows, she had become very agile. It was rare to see her like this. The reason was because of Sang Sang. She did not like to see other girls being close to Ning Quebec. Mistress Jian said, "I asked you to come today to discuss the right to light. The West Hill Divine Palace has requested the House of Red Sleeves to perform a dance. I wonder what the Academy thinks." Ning Ke said, "It's all up to you, Aunt Jian. If you think it's okay to go, then go. If you don't want to go, then don't. Since the contract has been signed, the West Hill Divine Palace can't do anything about it." Mistress Jian looked at him and said thoughtfully, "The right to light is the grandest festival recorded in the West Hill scriptures. It is said that it will only be held when Haotian descends a miracle. What I don't understand is why the West Hill Divine Palace wants to hold the right to light. If it is to celebrate the victory of the war, they will only become the laughing stock of the world." Ning Ke thought for a while and asked, "Then what do you mean?" Mistress Jian said, "It's okay to go and have a look. Maybe I can help you." Ning Ke said, "I'm just worried that the journey will not be peaceful." Mistress Jian looked at his eyes and asked, "Can you guarantee their safety?" Ning Ke said after a moment of silence, "Even if I can't, I think someone else can." Dewdrop and Xiao Chao clearly heard the conversation between Ning Ke and Mistress Jian, but they were depressed that they did not understand what they were talking about. Someone could? Who could it be? Ning Ke left the House of Red Sleeves in a black horse carriage. Not far from the street corner, the curtain of the carriage moved slightly, and Chu Yuxian got into the carriage. He took out several big envelopes from his arms and arranged them in the dim light in the carriage. He said in a low voice, "Until now, the great divine priest of revelation is still vacant. There is no clue about who is most likely to take over. In this war, the Divine Hall spies in the South School of Haotian Taoism and the Tang Empire's spies in the Divine Hall played a very important role. Hundreds of spies in the Divine Hall of Tang launched an attack at the same time and assassinated several Divine Talisman Masters at the cost of their lives. But there were still many spies in the Divine Hall. From the beginning of the peace talks in early spring, those hiding in the Peach Mountain began to send back all kinds of news through the Imperial Center Administration and secret servants. Chang'an City knew about the death of the great divine priest of revelation even earlier than Yi Hongyu, who was in Qinghe Prefecture at that time. Ning Ke thought of the mountain full of peach blossoms mentioned in the previous intelligence and was silent. According to the analysis of the Imperial Center Administration, Cheng Lixue should be the most likely to take over the Great Divine Priest of Revelation. But the inheritance of the Great Divine Priest of Revelation seems to be somewhat special, so his position is very awkward. If someone else really takes over the Great Divine Priest of Revelation, he is very likely to be in trouble. Chu Yuxian inherited his father's businessman qualities. Although he didn't know how to cultivate and didn't seem to have any outstanding ability, he could find the most valuable information from the reports of the Imperial Center Administration and secret guards. He looked at the file in his hand and said, "The Millennium Lamp in the Divine Hall of Light did go out, but those who wanted to find out the reason all died inexplicably. So no one knew the reason. The dozen priests mentioned in the previous intelligence were confirmed to have gone crazy. Except for this, there is no other new information." Ning Ke frowned slightly and seemed a little dissatisfied. Chu Yuxian said helplessly, "I have searched through the garbage in the Divine Hall, but they have all been processed. I can't find any marks, so I can't analyze them." Ning Ke asked, "The stables?" Chu Yuxian shook his head and said, "No." Ning Ke thought for a while and asked again, "The amount of wine?" If it were an ordinary intelligence officer, he might not notice the changes in the number of daily necessities in the Divine Hall. But Chu Yuxian was different. He said, "A lot." Ning Ke looked a little serious and asked, "Are there any horses that are pregnant?" The horses in the Divine Halls of West Hill were all papal cavalrymen's horses, and the male horses would definitely be castrated. So his question seemed a little strange, and Chu Yuxian didn't understand. "No." Chu Yuxian pinched the last big envelope with his fingers and said, "There is one thing that is strange. Our people in the Divine Hall once saw a pot of leftover porridge in the stables. Thinking of what you mentioned, he collected the leftover porridge in the pot." Ning Ke took the envelope and poured out the leftover porridge. The sour smell immediately filled the carriage. Chu Yuxian couldn't help but frown and cover his nose. Ning Ke looked very serious at this time, as if he didn't smell the unpleasant smell at all. He carefully poked the stinky porridge with the tip of a knife and finally found a black mane. "Idiot, thank you for your hard work." He looked at the black mane and said silently in his heart. The black carriage arrived at Yanming Lake. Chu Yuxian got off the carriage and disappeared in the street in the darkness. Ning Ke got off the carriage and stood in front of the courtyard in silence for a moment. Then he said to Wang Jinglu, "Get ready. We may have to go on a long journey." Wang Jinglu took off his straw hat, put away the reins, and said, "Have you really made up your mind? You know, this time it is not 10 miles outside the city, but thousands of miles of dangerous land." Ning Ke said, "I have to see it anyway. I'd rather see it myself than let others see it." Yanming Lake under the night sky reflected the dozens of lights in the house. It was like the night sky today. The bright moon had taken away too much of the brilliance of the once starry sky, making it very lonely. Ning Kai rowed the boat casually on the lake, and the side of the boat brushed against some new green branches from time to time. The lotus had not bloomed yet, but the lotus leaves had begun to reunite. The lotus leaves were gradually blooming, but people could not be reunited. Looking at the lotuses planted by him and Sang Sang, he thought of the drunkard's words again: every death in the world is a reunion after a long separation. He had never understood how Haotian could find the drunkard and the butcher in the human world. He had been investigating and got many clues, which vaguely pointed to the person he once thought was the most impossible. He looked from the green lotus to the Yenming mountain across the lake, as if he could see the wicked girl holding a black umbrella, standing in the wind and snow and singing to him. If it is really you, why don't I feel anything? Are you no longer my natal character? You returned the carriage and the iron arrows to me, but took the big black horse and the big black umbrella. Do you really want to separate from the family? But it was not that easy to separate from the family. Your name is still in my household register, your address is still in the old brush pen shop, and your notes are still buried in the tomb. How about I send them to you? The night wind in early summer blew Ning Kai's face and gave him a meaningful smile. Since every death in the world is a reunion after a long separation, let's meet again. The next morning, the famous black carriage passed through the steam of the Bun House and entered the palace under the gaze of many people and the Yulin royal guards. It never came out again. This situation lasted for a few days and caused a lot of speculation. No one knew what Ning Kai was doing in the palace, not even the ministers of the imperial court. They only knew that he did not leave Chang'an. The spies of the West Hill Divine Palace in Chang'an began to be vigilant. They paid a great price for the death of 2 maidservants in the old mansion. They finally got some information. From time to time, a dull knocking sound could be heard from the underground of the small building in the palace. Lights could still be seen in the imperial study at night. All kinds of rare materials, arranged by the Ministry of Revenue, were continuously transported into Chang'an from all counties. One evening, someone saw a strong man carrying an iron hammer into the palace. When the information was sent back to the Peach Mountain, the West Hill Divine Palace came to a shocking conclusion. The Academy was trying to modify the God-stunning array. But was it true? It's just a problem with my cervical vertebrae. It's okay. I just need to lie down more. It's just that it affects my working schedule. Continue to ask for monthly votes and recommendation votes. 2 more chapters tomorrow. I also suggest that everyone read the good posts in the book review section. There are indeed many good articles. Thank you for your hard work. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 843. Ning Kai did not come out after entering the palace. Even Cao Xiaoshu did not know what he was doing. Therefore, when he received the invitation from the academy, he thought he would know. A handsome and cute little attendant was waiting by the mountain path. He bowed politely when he saw them and said, "Mr. Chow, this way please." When they walked into the clouds and came out again, they were on the cliff platform at the back of the mountain of the academy. Cao Xiaoshu looked at the picturesque scenery and sighed with emotion. If His Majesty did not need him, he would definitely apply for the academy. Maybe he would have the opportunity to become a student of the 2nd floor. Now he was one of them. The Tangs who came to the back of the mountain of the academy for the first time were all nervous. Cao Xiaoshu was slightly better, but Chunchi, who came with him, could hardly control his emotions. He no longer had the feeling that he usually had. Hearing the sound of the waterfall falling into the pool, the little attendant brought them to the small courtyard. Jun Mo was waiting for them in the courtyard. After the 3 of them greeted each other, Jun Mo handed them a file and said, "The academy has made this plan. We can't see anything wrong with it, so we need your judgment." Qiao Xiaoshu took the file and opened it. Qinchi was a little confused. He thought that the teachers of the academy were all extremely intelligent people and did not need his judgment. Jun Mo knew what he was thinking and said, "The academy has killed many people, but they usually killed when they encountered them. We have no experience in this aspect." Qinchi understood the meaning of this sentence and suddenly felt a little pressure on his shoulders. He could not help but feel a little proud. He thought that it was no wonder that second brother Qiao would bring him along. Second brother Qiao finished reading the file and handed it to Qinchi. Then he looked at Jun Mo and said with a serious expression, "What Ning Ke is doing now is also related to this plan." Jun Mo said, "What he is going to do is not written on the file, but it is the most important point." Qinchi looked at the file and his breathing gradually became rapid. As the brains of the Fish Dragon gang, he was no stranger to conspiracies and tricks. He had set up many traps in his life, such as the one at the Spring Breeze Pavilion that rainy night. However, he had never thought that he would have the opportunity to participate in such a plan. It should be known that those two targets were no different from immortals to him in the past. The plan in the dossier was initially conceived by Fan Yu and Ning Ke, the fourth brother of the academy, and then drafted by eldest brother himself. There was no problem with the plan if it was only based on theory and logic. However, the academy lacked experience in this area, so they had to rely on the Fish Dragon gang. Qinchi held the file tightly and read it for a long time. He forcibly suppressed his excitement and nervousness, and his brain worked quickly. After a long time, he finally raised his head. "This setup is very good. I just need to modify some of the details. Give me one night, and I'll be able to complete it. I believe that even if those two are immortals, they won't be able to tell." He looked at Jun Mo and said, "But the most crucial problem is where can we find a suitable executor? Those who dare to do it must be extraordinary. Ordinary people don't have the guts." Jun Mo said, "I heard that on the day the Abbey Dean entered Chang'an, there were thousands of people who were hot-blooded and stood in front of youngest brother to protect him. It's not difficult for me to find such a person. If there's no other way, I'll let the two new disciples of the academy go. They haven't officially started cultivating, so they just meet the requirements. I was also on the Vermilion Bird Avenue that day." Qinchi shook his head and said, "At that time, ordinary people relied on a moment of courage. Now, they have to plan and then take action. It's completely different." Qiao Xiaoshu, who had not spoken much, suddenly said, "There's another way." As soon as he said this, Jun Mo and Qinchi immediately understood what he meant. Qinchi made the most resolute objection without hesitation, while Jun Mo looked at him quietly. Qiao Xiaoshu smiled and said, "It's a great pity that I couldn't enter the academy to study in this life. But these years of mingling in the streets have some benefits. I can act like a human, and I can act like a ghost. Does your horse still like to eat big grain porridge?" Yang Erxi pushed the bowl of cured pig trotters across the table and motioned for Ning Ke and Wang Jinglu not to stand on ceremony. Then he picked up the wine pot and filled the bowls in front of them. Ning Ke thought of the bad porridge he saw a few days ago and said with a smile, "I don't know if it still likes it, but that silly thing hasn't forgotten about it." Yang Erxi took a bite of the pig trotters and drank half a bowl of wine. He touched his stomach and sighed with satisfaction. Then he looked at him and reminded, "The situation is not good now. Be careful on the road." Ning Ke said, "The eastern border is already peaceful, so there should be no problems in the south." Yang Erxi sneered and said, "The peace of the eastern border was fought for by us. Those bastards in Qinghe County in the south have never been beaten up. How can they be so obedient?" Ning Ke raised his eyebrows slightly and said, "I remember you said 2 years ago that you had already retired." Yang Erxi patted his oily chest and said proudly, "You can't tell, can you? I joined the volunteer army and was the best at painting in the county. I was also good at fighting." Looking at this farmer that could be seen everywhere in the countryside of the Tang Empire, he did not know what to say. After Wang Jinglu entered the courtyard, he had been engrossed in eating meat and drinking wine. He did not understand how Ning Kai knew such a farmer and why he stayed here until he heard this sentence. He raised his head and held the wine bowl in front of Yang Erxi with both hands. He said seriously, "I admire you." Yang Erxi picked up the wine bowl and clinked it with him casually. He drank the remaining wine in the bowl and said, "Compared to those dead guys, there is nothing to admire." Ning Kai only then noticed that there was a scar between his eyebrows. Yang Erxi pointed there and said with a smile, "I was really lucky. Those barbarians slashed me a few times, but none of my vital parts were hurt. The wound on my face is also hidden in my eyebrows, but it did not disfigure me." Ning Kai did not say anything more and raised the wine bowl to toast again. Yang Erxi raised the wine pot and found that it was empty. He shouted towards the window, "Go to the village entrance and get another pot of wine. Oh yes, cut another pig trotter. When I was at the eastern border, I always wanted to eat the pig trotters at home." Yang Erxi looked at Ning Kai and Wang Jinglu and said emotionally, "Why do you think we risked our lives? Isn't it for the wife and children at home? To have delicious meat to eat." At this moment, his wife's grumbling voice came from the courtyard. "All you know is to eat meat and wine every day. You treat everyone you see. Aren't you afraid of eating all the money at home?" The voice was neither loud nor soft, so the people outside the courtyard could not hear it. But it was definitely heard by the two people sitting at the table eating meat. Wang Jinglu was a little uneasy, but Ning Kai did not seem to hear it at all. Yang Erxi felt very embarrassed. He slammed the table angrily and shouted, "What are you talking about? Can't I eat a piece of meat and drink a bowl of wine when I get home? Do you not want me to come back?" The courtyard suddenly became quiet, and then the sound of a woman crying could be heard. Yang Erxi felt even more embarrassed and shouted, "Crying, crying, crying. You only know how to cry. You cry when I'm not at home, and you still cry when you come back. I risked my life at the eastern border and earned 200 taels of silver. Can't I eat a few meals of meat? Also, if you dare to pick meat from my bowl for my son at night, I will beat you up." The woman's crying stopped. She began to chop the pig trotters, scolding the heartless man as she chopped. Ning Kai looked at him and asked carefully, "Really?" Yang Erxi said, "She's a woman. If I don't beat her up, how can she be obedient?" Ning Kai asked, "Aren't you afraid that she will go to the county government to report you?" Yang Erxi looked a little embarrassed and said, "Momentum, this is momentum, do you understand?" Ning Kai thought about the purpose of this trip to West Hill and felt that he had learned something. After eating and drinking, it was time to say goodbye. Yang Erxi sent them to the mill and said, "I don't know who you are, but I think you are not an ordinary person. I don't know what you are going to do. If you are going to kill people, kill a few more for me." If he had not drunk too much, Yang Erxi would never have said this. Ning Kai asked with a smile, "How did you know?" Yang Erxi said, "We only met once 2 years ago. If it were not for the black horse that drank up my bowl of porridge, I would have forgotten about you. How can an ordinary person afford to raise a horse like that?" Ning Kai asked, "How did you know that we are going to kill people?" Yang Erxi said, "You are Tangs." Ning Kai said, "And?" Yang Erxi said matter-of-factly, "If we Tangs go to Qinghe at this time, what else can we do but kill people?" At this moment, a pair of siblings ran over from the other side of the road. Yang Erxi squatted down and picked them up. He looked at Ning Kai and said proudly, "My daughter, my son. What do you think? Not bad, right? The top few in the school." Ning Kai said, "I don't have children." "What are you so proud of?" Yang Erxi said, "Have you married?" Ning Kai nodded and said, "Yes, you have met her." Yang Erxi said, the little girl who likes to drink? Ning Ke said with a smile, she probably doesn't like to drink anymore. Yang Erxi said, it has been 3 years. Why hasn't there been any news? Ning Ke said, I have no problems. I think she has some problems. Yang Erxi said unhappily, I don't like to hear this. You are a man. How can you push everything to a woman? If you have problems, try to solve them. Don't complain. Ning Ke said seriously, that's what I plan to do. The daughter in Yang Erxi's arms looked at the two strangers and asked curiously, Father, who are they? They are my friends from Chang'an. Yang Erxi said proudly, meaning that her father did have friends from Chang'an. He didn't lie to her before. The daughter looked at Ning Ke and rolled her eyes. She asked, where are you going? Ning Ke said, I am going to the south. The daughter asked curiously, what are you going to do in the south? Ning Ke said with a smile, to pick up my wife. The daughter said happily, is the bride beautiful? Ning Ke thought for a while and said, not really. The daughter said seriously, even if she is not beautiful, you can't abandon her. Ning Ke looked at her and said seriously, of course. Yang Erxi has begun his journey to pick up his wife. If you have any impression of the last part of the dialogue, you should remember the chapter in the first volume, the dialogue between Yang Erxi and his children. It's nightfall, my favorite. Every time I write about Yang Erxi's family, I can't help but feel happy. Deep down, I still like local literature. It's been 10 years since the incident in Ningxiu. It's been 10 years. Woo. In addition, after being reminded by Xiao Xiao, he realized that the 8th chapter was about the bias of a calm mind. At that time, he had been thinking of asking Ning Ke to calm his mind, but after thinking about it, he decided to change it. This was not a problem of upbringing, please understand, then, I really wanted to crazily write 300,000 this month, but I'm really getting old. It looks like there's no hope. I'll try my best to write more and better. I'll write 1 chapter today, 2 chapters tomorrow, and 3 chapters the day after. I won't slack off. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 844. The summer in the southern wilderness of the Tang Empire was not hot. It was as gentle as the Empress, who was also called Summer. It was very comfortable. Along the way to the south, Ning Ke naturally thought of the trip to the Lank Temple with Sang Sang. It was here that he fell in love with this place. He and Wang Jinglu rode in an ordinary carriage. When they reached the verdant canyon, they could not go any further. They abandoned the carriage and walked on foot, struggling to find a path among the rocks. There were many Tang soldiers reinforcing guard posts in the steep canyon. The imperial court did not intend to completely seal the verdant canyon. Naturally, they wanted to recover the Qinghe River one day. Walking out of the verdant canyon, they saw weeds growing in the wilderness. Even the mature cultivated land had been abandoned. Brown bloodstains could be seen in the fields, as if they would bleed with a casual step. Ning Ke seemed to see the late autumn of last year, when his senior brothers and sisters stood here facing hundreds of thousands of troops. He seemed to see second brother fighting with the world with an iron sword. He felt the pressure on his shoulders heavier. It was late. The two rested in the open air in the wilderness in front of the verdant canyon. The insects were chirping in the summer night, and the bright moon rose from the mountains. Ning Ke was speechless as he looked at the moon. When they woke up the next morning, he and Wang Jinglu continued to the south. What they saw was no different from previous years. The small bridge, the flowing water, the white walls, the black eaves, and the famous gardens along the Fuqian River were all beautiful. There were no traces of war in Yangzhou City. The bluestone streets were as clean as if they had been washed. There were no bloodstains. Vendors called out to their customers in a soft local accent, and the unique aroma of pickled duck filled the restaurants. If it were not for the well-equipped warlords patrolling the streets, it would be impossible to imagine that so many people had died and so many murders had occurred in this city a few months ago. Ning Ke and Wang Jinglu walked to the back garden of the mayor's mansion. He looked at the green bamboos sticking out of the wall in silence. There were spots on the bamboos that looked like tear stains or bloodstains. On that day, the city defense mansion gathered the Westhill Divine Palace Coalition Army as an order and gathered the officials of Yangzhou in the mansion. Then, they suddenly turned hostile and asked these officials to surrender. After they refused, they started a bloodbath. A total of 13 imperial court officials were killed, and 3 of them were even descendants of the warlords. Wang Jinglu looked at the city guard mansion and said in a low voice, "The person in charge of this matter is called Zhong Dejun." At that time, he was the commander of the city guard mansion. He was the son of the city guard. The warlords invited the admiral of the navy to Fuchin River for a discussion and set up an ambush. After a bitter battle, the admiral of the navy and the senior officers died in battle. Then, the purge and massacre of the navy on the Great Lake began. In the evening, the armed forces of the Chui clan forced their way into the governor's mansion of Qinghe County. The governor committed suicide. In just a few simple sentences, he had clearly described the major incident on the day of the rebellion in Qinghe County. On that bloody day, 3,000 Tang Navy officers and soldiers were either dead or injured, and more than 300 court officials who were loyal to the Tang Empire were beheaded. As Wang Jinglu had said earlier, there were actually many descendants of the warlords among these officials. It was just that they did not agree with the opinions of the elders in the warlords, so they became sacrifices. No matter how clean the bluestone streets in Yangzhou City were, to the point where not a single trace of blood could be seen or the smell of blood could be smelled, the blood had still flowed out and seeped into the soil between the bluestone cracks. It was not that it could not be seen or smelled, but that it had not existed. Since it had existed, it should be remembered. Ning Ke did not say anything and left the city guard mansion with Wang Jinglu. Instead of going to the inn, they went straight out of the city to the banks of the Fuchin River. They rented a boat with a black awning for 5 taels of silver and went downstream. It had not been long since the end of the war. The temporary peace in Qinghe County did not allow people to truly feel relaxed. At least, it was difficult for tourists to relax, so there were not many boats on the beautiful Fuchin River. Ning Ke and Wang Jinglu sat on both sides of the black awning boat and looked at the scenery by the river. Even though they were both experienced and knowledgeable, they had to admit that in terms of exquisite beauty, there was no place in the world that could beat this place. The black awning boat swayed leisurely as it sailed past the famous gardens by the river. The boatman explained the historical origins of the famous gardens from time to time, and the private property of the green bamboo at the foot of Crouching Tiger Mountain. He was very familiar with these things. Wang Jinglu was not in the mood to listen to these things, but Ning Ke listened very carefully. The Fuchin River was extremely beautiful, but unfortunately, it was not long. The black awning boat moved slowly, swaying and swaying until it reached the downstream. It went ashore through the forest and arrived at the coal mountain of Qinghe County. The warlords of Qinghe County were known for being literate, but they did not lack the support of military and economic power. The coal mountain, which stretched for hundreds of miles, was the treasure that Haotian had given to the warlords. Ning Ke and Wang Jinglu stood in a remote corner of the coal mountain and silently looked at the movement here. They saw the stewards of the warlords waving their leather whips, and the naked miners were dragging the coal cart with difficulty. Their bodies were covered in soot, and the soot was mixed with the blood from the whipping. It was a tragic sight. Wang Jinglu's expression was extremely ugly at first, but after observing for a while, he looked slightly better. He said, "They should be barbarians captured from the primeval forest, and some slaves sent by Westhill." Ning Ke said, since the peace agreement has been reached, as long as the families of Qinghe County are not as arrogant and stupid as idiots, they should know what awaits them if they still dare to trap our people here to do hard labor. Last autumn, Qinghe County had rebelled, and 3,000 Tang Navy officers and soldiers had suffered heavy casualties. Those who did not die were all taken to the coal mountain downstream of the Fujian River to do hard labor. In the peace agreement signed between the Tang Empire and the West Hill Divine Palace, the most important condition was that Qinghe County had to return these Tang soldiers. Some time ago, those Tang soldiers who had been tortured inhumanely were sent back to Chang'an. According to them, those days were too painful. Ning Kai made a special trip to the coal mountain because the Tang imperial court felt that there was something wrong with the number of people returned by Qinghe County. After the rebellion, at least 1,000 Tang soldiers were taken to the coal mountain to do hard labor, but this time, less than 600 were sent back to Chang'an. The explanation given by Qinghe County was that many Tang soldiers were seriously injured in the battle. After being taken to the coal mountain, although they received treatment, they could not be cured and died just like that. This was a very reasonable explanation, but Ning Kai did not believe it. As time passed slowly, the sun began to set in the west. The hard labor in the coal mountain was still desperately struggling. He walked towards an abandoned coal pit. According to the secret guard's intelligence, when the West Hill Divine Palace's diplomatic corps left Qinghe and began to prepare for negotiations with the Tang Empire, the coal pit became quiet and no one entered it again. Ning Kai and Wang Jinglu walked along the tunnel into the abandoned coal pit. As the tunnel extended, the top of the pit became lower and lower. They had to stand up, and it became much more difficult to move. After walking for an unknown period of time, the underground coal pit was completely dark and bone-piercingly cold. The faint wind condensed the pungent smell of decay in one place, unable to be released. Ning Kai stopped and reached out to hold the padao. After confirming that there was no danger at the bottom of the pit, he lit an oil lamp beside the cave wall. Wang Jinglu looked at the bottom of the pit, which was illuminated by the dim light, and his face became abnormally pale. Ning Kai's expression did not change. He squatted down and used his hand to touch the leg bone of a rotten corpse. After confirming that it had been smashed by a heavy object, he walked inside and looked at the injuries on the corpses. There were at least hundreds of corpses at the bottom of the coal pit. These corpses were so badly rotten that there was no sign of their identity. However, he knew that these were the people he was looking for. These people did not die of knife wounds or arrow wounds. They died of starvation, thirst, or exhaustion. These people had been brave Tang soldiers when they were alive. Of course, they had resisted before being tortured. That was why the whips had taken away the flesh on the bones, and why the leg bones had been broken by the stones. Ning Kai and Wang Jinglu stood in front of the corpses of the Tang soldiers and were silent for a long time. The Tang Empire had always given the highest respect to the soldiers who fought for the country. Even a corpse would not be allowed to wander outside, let alone the Tang soldiers who had been alive at that time. Ever since they knew that more than 1,000 of the Tang Navy had been sent to the coal mountain by the warlords of Qinghe County, the imperial court of the Tang Empire had never stopped trying to save them. Even at the critical moment when the Abidine entered Chang'an, the imperial court did not forget to send a warning to Qinghe County and secretly promised to give them corresponding benefits as long as they could release these people. It was believed that after this, the warlords of Qinghe County would be very clear about Chang'an's attitude and would not dare to torture these Tang soldiers anymore. However, in less than a month before this, hundreds of these Tang soldiers had died at the coal mountain. One could imagine what kind of torture and pain they had suffered at that time. Wang Jinglu used to be a minister of offerings in the prince's mansion and lived a carefree life. Later, he was sent by His Majesty to serve under General Su Shi. After several years of training, he had long become a real soldier. Looking at the hundreds of corpses at the bottom of the pit, he said, "We have to find a way to send them back." Ning Ke had been in the army in the city of Wei for many years and knew the customs of the army. However, he did not agree with Wang Jinglu and said, "It's not a problem to be buried here, but we need to build a better tomb." Wang Jinglu understood what he meant. One day, the Tang Empire's cavalry would rush out of the verdant canyon and sweep across the south of the human world. Qinghe County was and would be the territory of the Tang Empire in the future. Ning Ke said, "When I slaughtered the Qinghe County Guild Hall in Chang'an, some people always thought that I was too ruthless and worried that it would affect the hearts of the people of Qinghe. If they saw this scene, I don't know if they would still insist on their views. We can take our time to build the hearts of the people, but the dead people will urge us to move faster." Wang Jinglu said, "There are still many people in Qinghe County who are loyal to the Tang Empire. Even many of the descendants of the warlords still consider themselves Tangs. Otherwise, there would not have been so many descendants and officials who died during the rebellion. I'm just worried that if we kill too many of them, it will push them to the opposite side." When the warlords rebelled, those people did not stand up to express their opinions. When more than 300 Tang officials were beheaded, they still stood by and watched silently. I don't know where their hearts are, but I only know that they were once silent. That means they are accomplices, and that they have a reason to die. Ning Ke said, "My hands are stained with a lot of blood, and no matter how I wash them, I can't wash them clean. Some people seem to have no blood on their hands, but even if they jump into the Fuchin River, they won't be able to wash them clean. Try to finish the next chapter before 1 o'clock. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 845. Outside Yangzhou City, the Fuchin River was the most beautiful. Inside the city, the thin lake had the best view. It was already summer, and the lake was covered with lotus leaves. The willow trees by the lake were shady. The House of Red Sleeves song and dance troupe went to the West Hill Divine Palace for the right to light. As usual, they stayed in the Song family's courtyard by the thin lake. The atmosphere was as depressing as before. It was still the fourth steward of the Chui family who came to send out the invitations. This steward did not hide his severed fingers behind his back. Instead, he placed them calmly in front of him, as if he wanted these girls from Chang'an to see clearly what kind of harm he had suffered because of them. 3 years ago, the House of Red Sleeves went to the Lank Temple for the Yulan Hungry Ghost Festival. It happened to be Elder Chui's 100th birthday, and the Chui family wanted the House of Red Sleeves to present a lost song. Ning Ke wrote a letter, and this arrogant fourth steward had several fingers broken and was punished with a board many times. As time passed, many things had changed. Today, the Chui family invited the House of Red Sleeves to the Chui Garden by the Fuchin River to celebrate the birthday of the clan leader, Chui Shi. They also asked them to present a song. Xiao Chao, who was calm and proud last time, became more and more low-key now. Qinghe Prefecture was no longer part of the Tang Empire, and the reputation of the academy was not enough to ensure the girls' safety. Xiao Chao looked at the West Hill Divine Palace priest beside her. The priest did not seem to hear anything. Although he was ordered to bring the House of Red Sleeves back to the West Hill Divine Kingdom, it did not mean that he did not want to see these proud Tang girls being humiliated in Qinghe Prefecture. Seeing the young lady in charge of the House of Red Sleeves accept the invitation, the fourth steward of the Chui family smiled with satisfaction. He gently stroked his itchy broken fingers and walked out of the Song family's courtyard with his head held high. On the streets of Yangzhou City, a noise entered the small green curtain sedan. The fourth steward frowned slightly and lifted the curtain. He said in a low voice, "What is young Master Tang doing there?" Ning Ke and Wang Jinglu returned to Yangzhou City. They wore straw hats and looked like ordinary people. They were not eye-catching and did not arouse anyone's suspicion. Walking on the street, Ning Kai suddenly stopped and looked up at the signboard with the words, Qinghe Post Office, written on it. He could not help but remember that this place used to be called the Tang Post Office, and Sang Sang had sent a banknote to the city of Wei here. Before he had time to sigh, his attention was attracted by the noise on the street. He and Wang Jinglu walked over to take a look and saw that the crowd was surrounded by several young men dressed like scholars. As soon as he finished speaking, several people rushed out from the crowd and kicked the young men to the ground. They tied them up tightly with hemp ropes and lifted them up on wooden rods. They walked towards the clan ancestral hall outside the city. It was still the beautiful Fuchin River. It was only then that Ning Kai realized that there were many cages made of bamboo by the river. They were probably used to drown pigs. Over the years, countless men and women had drowned in the beautiful Fuchin River. Who knew how many souls had died in the gentle and beautiful water plants in the river? He stood by the river and looked at the water plants. He listened to the sounds of rods and the cheers of the people coming from the ancestral hall of the Chui family. His expression did not change. After a long time, he turned around. There were nearly 1,000 people surrounding the ancestral hall. Chui Huasheng was dressed in white. His face was pale and his body was covered in blood. He hung on a pole outside the ancestral hall and seemed to be dying at any moment. Wang Jinglu walked back to his side. Ning Kai said, cheering doesn't mean that everyone agrees with the Chui family's punishment. It's just that Chui Huasheng is usually a high and mighty playboy. Today, he was stripped of his clothes and beaten to such a miserable state. The onlookers are naturally happy. Wang Jinglu was startled and said, I've heard some news. Chui Huasheng is indeed a legitimate descendant of the Chui family. He married Xiaofan, the youngest daughter of the Ruyang Zhizhou. On the day of the rebellion, the Qiu family was destroyed by the rebel army. Xiaofan was at her maiden home and died on the spot. Ning Kai said, the so-called popular sentiment must be stabilized before it can be won over. The Chui family did not hesitate to let their own descendant die to silence the people of Qinghe County. Wang Jinglu asked softly, if that's the case, should we save him? Ning Kai said, this person loves his wife very much. It's painful for him to live now. Wang Jinglu said, at least he shouldn't suffer while he's alive. Ning Kai said, there are still 2 people in the knowing destiny state by the Fuchin River. I won't take the risk for this person. Of course, if he can survive this time, he might be of some use in the future. After saying this, he turned and left the ancestral hall. He looked at the other side of the Fuchin River and sensed the faint fluctuations of the array in tent coming from the manors. He thought to himself that it was indeed a place with a longer history than the academy. Its heritage should not be underestimated. There were 2 people in the knowing destiny state by the Fuchin River. This did not make him feel afraid. However, if he were to fight, it would be a big commotion. Then everyone would know that he had left Chang'an. At least before entering the West Hill Divine Kingdom, he could not let anyone know that he had left Chang'an. Otherwise, all the powerful cultivators in the world would try to kill him. After all, he had signed an agreement with the West Hill Divine Palace to ensure the safety of Qinghe County. If he killed too many people here, the Divine Hall would not tolerate it forever. Before the Academy dealt with the drunkard and the butcher, the 2 swords hanging over the Tang Empire, there were many things that he could not do. However, there were some things that he could and should do. As young Erxi said, if the Tangs went to Qinghe County now, what else could they do other than kill people? Ning Kai did not enter Yangzhou City this time. He stood in the woods outside the road and looked at the official on the white horse in silence. The official was very young, elegant and calm. He was accompanied by dozens of subordinates and soldiers. He did not forget to wave to the people of Qinghe County on the road, which attracted a burst of cheers. In Ning Kai's eyes, this young official was very funny. This was because he was wearing the official uniform of the Tang Empire. Only some details were changed, which made him look a little funny. Moreover, Ning Ke had always thought that this person was funny because his name was Zhong Dajuan. On the day of the rebellion, he made the most contribution. He is also the son of the governor of Yangzhou City, so he received many benefits after the incident. If Qinghe County declares to be a nation, he will probably be conferred a title. Wang Jinglu looked at Zhong Dajuan and said. The more contributions he made during the rebellion, the more Tangs he killed. All the officials of Yangzhou City were tricked into the governor's mansion by this person and then killed by the assassins lying in ambush. Ning Ke looked at Zhong Dajuan's hand that was holding the reins and said, I will leave after I kill him. Make preparations in Yangzhou City. I will be back in a month at most. There was a dilapidated temple outside Yangzhou City. It was the only temple there. Two monks suddenly came to the dilapidated temple. One of them had a dark complexion and a tranquil and extraordinary bearing. The other monk was blind and had a dejected and silent demeanor. Ning Ke followed the twilight into the dilapidated temple. He looked at the dark-skinned monk and smiled slightly. He said, Senior brother, long time no see. This monk was the current abbot of the Lank Temple, Monk Guanhai. Monk Guanhai looked at him and sighed. He said, everyone in the world is waiting for you to come out of Chang'an City so that they can kill you. Who would have thought that you would actually come out? Ning Ke said, Senior brother has been cultivating in seclusion for the past few years. Didn't you also come out of seclusion? Monk Guanhai said, the West Hill Divine Palace is going to hold a right to light. Someone from Hua Mountain has to go. Ning Ke said, I want to go and watch the fun too. Monk Guanhai only then knew that he was going to West Hill. He was so shocked that he did not know what to say. Ning Ke looked at the back of the temple and asked, how is he recently? It's a little late. 3 chapters tomorrow. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 846. Ning Ke used a talisman to set up a bounded domain in the dilapidated temple. He did not have to worry about the voices in front of the temple being transmitted to the back of the temple. Even so, he still paid attention to his voice and did not want the blind monk to hear him. Monk Guanhai sighed and said, he was expelled from Chang'an and has been wandering around the world. Although his cultivation state is still there, his eyes cannot see. Naturally, he has had a hard time. The year before last, he wandered to the Hua Mountain and was found by the monks in the temple. Since then, he has been cultivating with me in the Lank Temple. Ning Ke looked at the back of the temple and thought that the father of the perverted monk had been killed by him in the western wilderness. The Xiankong Temple had long expelled him and naturally did not care about his life. He must have had a miserable life wandering in the world all these years. But he could not help but feel sympathy for him. Senior brother, you have worked hard. He looked at Monk Guanhai and said, I am sorry to ask you to tell me those stories. Monk Guanhai sighed and said, although he committed many crimes, he is blind and has nothing to do with the world in the temple. Why drag him into the mortal world to be tortured? Ning Ke said, if he really had a pure heart, why would he leave the Hua Mountain with you? Monk Guanhai looked at him and said, I can understand how the Tangs feel. But if you want to do something, why do you have to ask others? Why did you have to do this? Ning Ke said, yes, it is indeed meaningless for senior brother to bring him here. It is just an excuse. The academy does not want to give Haotian Taoism an excuse, and I need an excuse to convince myself to do something. Monk Guanhai sighed and said, back then, even the headmaster could not see which path you would take in the future. Now it seems that I am a little worried. Ning Ke said, Master entered Qishan. How could he not know that I would take the wrong path? Ning Ke walked into Yangzhou City under the cover of the night. He came to the outside of the mayor's mansion and looked at the green bamboos sticking out of the courtyard wall. After a moment of silence, he bent his knees slightly and jumped to the top of the wall. He stretched out his right hand like lightning and grabbed the not-so-smooth bamboo. He slid into the mansion silently like a thin piece of cloth. At this time, Wang Jinglu had already left and was probably making preparations by the Fuchin River. He was the only one who entered the mayor's mansion. He did not use any talismans, nor did he hold a knife. He only relied on his incredible physical strength to easily enter the deepest part of the mayor's mansion. No one could find him. In terms of cultivation state, he was now a powerhouse in the knowing destiny state. But his real strength was mainly the devil's body after cultivating the Great Spirit and his identity as a divine talisman master. In Qinghe Prefecture, except for the two knowing destiny powerhouses from the aristocratic families, no one could pose a threat to him. This also meant that no one in Yangzhou City could stop him from doing what he wanted. Not long after, he carried Zhong Dejun out of the back garden. Zhong Dejun didn't lose consciousness, but he couldn't speak. His pale face was full of fear. Ning Ke casually walked to the courtyard wall as if he was carrying a bag of trash. He waved his arm and threw Zhong Dejun over the wall. There was a muffled thud, and then he jumped out. Some blood was spilled on the street outside the courtyard wall. Zhong Dejun's face became even paler, and his facial features twitched painfully. Some of his bones were probably broken, but he still couldn't speak. Even at this time, he still didn't know who had quietly sneaked into the mansion and restrained him. Coming to the rundown temple outside Yangzhou City, Ning Ke threw Zhong Dejun to the ground and poured a bowl of herbal tea to drink slowly. Zhong Dejun found that he could move his hands and feet. The first thing he did was not try to escape, but to cover his painful chest and cough out the blood that had been stuck in his throat for a long time. Because of the pain and fear, his forehead was covered with soybean-sized beads of sweat. He wiped the sweat with his trembling arms and forced himself to calm down before he dared to see what the person looked like. Zhong Dejun was a descendant of a prominent family in Qinghe City. He was born with a golden key in his mouth and had a smooth life. He made great contributions in the rebellion last year and was even more powerful. If he had any regret in his life, it would be Ning Ke, his former classmate in the academy. So of course he remembered Ning Quebec. Even if Ning Ke turned into ashes, he would still recognize him. How could he forget the person who had brought him endless humiliation? What made him feel even more humiliated was that he couldn't hate Ning Ke when he saw him again after such a long time. It had nothing to do with the pain in his body. It was only related to fear and despair. Even if he was famous in Yangzhou City, how could he be compared to Mr. 13 of the academy? The confrontation between Prince Longqing and Ning Ke might be a good story from another perspective. But if people knew that he had secretly hated Ning Ke for many years, they would definitely laugh at him endlessly. Just like what Zhong Dejun had thought with unwillingness, self-mockery, helplessness and despair in countless nights in the past few years, Ning Ke had basically forgotten the small stories in the academy. He didn't know that Zhong Dejun hated him so much, but he really hated Zhong Dejun. Zhong Dejun sat up with difficulty and looked at Ning Ke's back in front of the broken Buddha statue. He opened his mouth and wanted to say something, but he didn't know what to say. Would it be useful to beg for mercy at this time? Ning Ke turned around. Zhong Dejun asked in a trembling voice, "What are you going to do?" Ning Ke looked at him without saying anything. His eyes were calm and emotionless. Seeing Ning Ke's eyes, Zhong Dejun knew that he would definitely suffer a lot today. He might even die. But he didn't understand why Ning Ke would do this. "Why?" he asked. Ning Ke still didn't say anything. He just looked at his eyes quietly. Zhong Dejun saw the killing intent in his eyes. He saw the blood in the defense mansion that day and the unwilling eyes of the Tang officials who were killed by knives and axes. His body began to tremble violently. The desire to survive overwhelmed his fear. He clenched his fists tightly in front of his chest and shouted in a hoarse voice, "The Academy signed the contract. You can't kill me." Ning Kai still didn't say anything. Zhong Dejun knelt in front of him and spread out his hands. He tried his best to explain, "I'm just following orders. Besides, I'm just a nobody in Qinghe Prefecture. If you want to kill people to establish your authority, there's no point in choosing me. What's more, if people know that you've left Chang'an, the powerhouses of Haotian Taoism will come to kill you. Why do you have to take such a risk for a nobody like me?" Ning Kai looked at him quietly and didn't say a word. Zhong Dejun was desperate and shouted in horror, "When you killed people in the guild, you didn't sign the contract. But if you kill me now, it's a provocation to the Divine Hall. The Divine Hall wants the whole world to submit to us. How can we allow this to happen? Do you want to start a war again? What on earth do you want to do?" It was unusually quiet in the ruined temple. Only Zhong Dejun's screams kept ringing, echoing between the broken Buddha statue and the dirty old curtains. This strange feeling was driving him crazy. He slapped the dusty ground desperately and explained the reason why Ning Kai couldn't kill him in a hoarse voice. He belittled his identity and made the most painful confession and the craziest insults, just to save his life. "You're scaring me, aren't you?" Zhong Dejun looked at Ning Kai, his face full of snot and tears. He laughed like a madman and said, "You can't kill me, so you want to scare me crazy." He seemed to have grasped the key point of this matter. He waved his arms excitedly and shouted, "I understand. You're scaring me. I, Zhong Dejun, will not be scared by others." Hearing this, Ning Kai smiled and left the ruined temple. Looking at the tightly closed temple door, Zhong Dejun's face was full of astonishment. His arms were still in the air and he had no idea what was going on. Why did Ning Kai just leave like this? At this moment, a voice came from behind the temple, "Are you Zhong Dejun?" Just as the voice died away, a monk holding a bamboo stick walked out from behind the temple. He wore a cloth kasaya and slightly tilted his head. His eyes were deep and dark like a hole. Zhong Dejun looked at the blind monk and answered subconsciously, "Yes." Hearing his answer, the blind monk laughed. His laughter was hoarse and loud, hitting the four walls of the ruined temple and shaking the dust off. However, it seemed so resentful. Zhong Dejun felt a little strange and asked, "Who are you?" The blind monk was silent for a moment and said slowly, "I'm Wu Dao." Zhong Dejun felt the name was familiar, but he couldn't remember where he had heard it. Wu Dao walked to Zhong Dejun and squinted his blind eyes. He looked at Zhong Dejun who he couldn't see and asked indifferently, "Have you stayed in Chang'an?" Zhong Dejun became more vigilant and answered cautiously, "Only for 2 years." The blind monk was the illegitimate son of a Vedanta of Xiankong Temple. Because of his bad behavior, he was expelled from the wilderness. After he set foot in the mortal world, he got into many love affairs and violated many good women. He once participated in the mountain climbing test of the 2nd floor of the academy. It was on that day that he met Ning Kai and Sang Sang. He fell in love with Sang Sang at first sight and wanted to get close to her. However, he was first expelled by Master Yen Sei and then blinded by the great divine priest of light. Since then, he had become a useless person. He was a lascivious monk in the mortal world and had no contact with the cultivation world. He didn't know what had happened in the cultivation world. After he was blinded, he wandered around the world and went to the Lank Temple to meditate in seclusion. Gradually, he forgot the past and the stories that senior brother Guanhai told him. He even almost forgot what the little girl looked like. However, he never forgot the name that person said on the mountain road. The Academy, Zhong Dejun. He didn't hear the whole conversation between Ning Ke and Zhong Dejun. He only heard the last sentence that Zhong Dejun said. He thought that he had been far away from the mortal world and had no love or hate. Unexpectedly, he suddenly heard that name in this broken temple and found that he still hated. He hated himself for being blind. He hated himself for falling in love with the little girl. He hated the little girl for being blind and following Zhong Dejun. He hated himself for losing everything while Zhong Dejun had everything. No wonder senior brother brought me here. I think he wanted me to see my heart clearly and find real peace. However, I can only let senior brother down. Because only by killing you can I get real peace and free myself from the abyss of hatred. Wu Dao looked at Zhong Dejun and said seriously. Zhong Dejun looked at the monk's blind eyes and felt his body turn extremely cold. Wu Dao said calmly, "Don't worry. I will kill you seriously with a very proper attitude." Zhong Dejun wanted to say something, but he could only let out a scream. Everything had to be done seriously and focused. Concentration would slow down. He thought that on this night, in this broken temple without incense, he would die very slowly. Miserable screams and pleas for mercy came from the dilapidated temple. The two old doors seemed to be unable to bear to see the scene in the temple anymore, and they trembled slightly. Ning Ke stood in front of the temple and listened to the sounds coming from behind. He thought of the scene when he went hunting with the old hunter for the first time. The beast at the bottom of the pit was pierced by a dozen bamboo sticks but could not die immediately. It seemed to be very similar to the scream made by Zhong Dejun. He couldn't help but laugh. Monk Guanhai looked at his expression and silently chanted the name of Buddha. He said bitterly, "You have indeed joined the devil. If I follow you to do such evil things, I think it will be difficult for me to see the Buddha land in this life." Ning Ke looked at him and said, "Since Zhong Dejun deserves to die, this is naturally not evil." Monk Guanhai shook his head and said, "Good and evil are in the heart. Deception is evil. Although younger brother Wu Dao has done countless evil things in the first half of his life, he has repented and changed in the temple. I lied to him to kill people. My sin is even greater." Ning Ke said, "As I said before, since he was willing to leave Hua Mountain with you, it means that he still has nostalgia for the world of mortals. Now it seems that nostalgia is hatred. How can the hatred be resolved? Not the Dharma, not the scriptures. Revenge, 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 without pain, how can the hatred brought by pain be resolved? After tonight, the hatred of Wu Dao will be resolved, and he will no longer have any greed for the world of mortals. He may even be able to understand Tao in the future. No matter how I look at it, senior brother, what you have done is good. How can there be evil? I can't win against you in an argument." Monk Guanhai said guiltily, "But I know that my behavior will not be liked by the Buddha." Ning Ke said, "The Buddha is just a cultivator. How can he judge us by his right and wrong? If you are worried that you will not see the Buddha land in this life, I can help you build a real Buddha land in the human world." Monk Guanhai didn't know how to respond. At this moment, the screams in the dilapidated temple finally weakened, and then they did not sound again. Wu Dao pushed open the temple door and staggered out. He spread out his hands that were full of blood, looked around, and cried, "Senior brother, where are you? Where are you?" Ning Ke quietly walked to the side. Monk Guanhai stepped forward to support Wu Dao. Wu Dao fell to the ground, hugged his leg, and cried loudly. He said in a trembling voice, "Younger brother, I am sorry for your teachings." Monk Guanhai's eyes were also wet. He looked at Ning Ke, who was standing next to him, with complicated emotions, as a farewell. Then he supported Wu Dao and walked into the dark night. Ning Ke looked at the bloody scene in the dim, dilapidated temple, and stood quietly. When he heard the sound from the distant official road and saw the twinkling torches, he turned and left. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 847. I remember saying that I was not used to the input method and often typed myself as myself. Looking back, I actually made many such mistakes. I'm going crazy. I can change them in the manuscript, but I really can't change them in the VIP chapters. Please forgive me. This is the second chapter. There's one more to go. I'll try to finish it before 3:30. It did not take long for the people in the mayor's mansion to discover that Zhong Dejun had been kidnapped. They began to search around Yangzhou city. The armed forces of the warlords showed their strong control. In a short time, they found some clues. Then, they held torches and went to the dilapidated temple outside the city. In the dilapidated temple, they saw Zhong Dejun lying in a pool of blood on the ground. After confirming that the noble was no longer breathing, everyone's faces were filled with anxiety and unease. The famous gardens by the Fuchin River also became tense because of Zhong Dejun's strange death. The atmosphere became even more depressing as the subsequent clues were found. The two monks boarded the official ship of the South Jin Kingdom an hour ago. They should be on the lake by now. Even if we chase them with a speedboat, we can only catch up with them on the other side of the lake. Cui Shi looked at the wrinkles on his old father's face. After a moment of silence, he said, the Zhong family reacted strongly. They requested to immediately send people to board the ship and chase after them. I've suppressed them for now. The head of the Cui family looked like an ordinary rich man. However, compared to his father, the true ruler of Qinghe County, he was still not calm enough. The old master had once been the prime minister of the Tang Empire and had supreme prestige in Qinghe County. He could do anything he wanted and gave Qinghe County a rare opportunity. However, he was such a powerful old man that he looked no different from an ordinary old servant. In fact, he had once met Ning Ke as an old servant. The Zhong family only had such a talented disciple. He died so tragically. It's natural for them to react strongly. You handled it well. You can't let their anger destroy the rare peace of Qinghe County. Old Master Cui extended his hand into the copper basin and slowly rubbed the towel that had been scalded by the boiling water. His somewhat exhausted voice was gradually soothed by the heat. He said, but the identities of those two monks must be investigated. The most important reason why the warlords of Qinghe County were so low-key about tonight's murder was that the two monks were the biggest suspects. In today's world, the Buddhism sect was as low-key as before. However, as the academy and Haotian Taoism both suffered losses, people began to be wary of the monks' power. The old man covered his face with the hot towel and remained silent for a long time. He felt that there was more to Zhong Dejun's death, but there was nothing he could do. Be quiet, be quiet. His aged voice passed through the wet towel, echoing through the quiet study along with the steam. At a time like this, Clear River must be quiet. Cui Shi knew where his father's worry or fear came from. But as long as the West Hill Divine Palace could not destroy the Tang Empire, the Qinghe Kingdom would be in fear. What was the use of peace? Old Master Cui crumpled the towel into a ball and threw it into the copper basin. He looked at him and said, keep a low profile at tomorrow's birthday banquet. As for the House of Red Sleeves, send them out of the country. Cui Shi looked at the white cloth on his father's face and suddenly thought maliciously that this really looked like the scene of those old people dying. He agreed calmly and walked out of the study. The study was silent. Old Master Cui walked shakily to the table and picked up the perfectly warm teacup. He brought it to his lips and took a sip. His wrinkled face was filled with worry. The teacup in his hand trembled slightly. The clear yellow tea rippled like waves, reflecting his true feelings at the moment. After learning of Zhong Dejun's death, he was as calm as he had been in the past years. But who knew that he had already begun to fear and feel uneasy? From the beginning of the family school, he had made a grand wish. He wanted to lead Qinghe County to regain the independence and glory of 1,000 years ago and cut off the barbaric and uncivilized Tangs. However, he did not dare to do anything and could only wait obediently. He nurtured his body and strictly controlled his diet. He had lived for more than 100 years and was still healthy. He could even live for many more years before the day he had waited for finally came. The headmaster left the human world. Old Master Cui began to leave his name in history. But he was still afraid, especially every night when he looked at the bright moon shining on the Fuchin River. He was so afraid that he could not even sleep. Monk Guanhai and Wu Dao took a boat and left in the night. They would go directly to the West Hill to participate in the right to light held by the Divine Hall. Perhaps Wu Dao would get some kind of opportunity from that bloody night and leave. Wang Jinglu disappeared from Yangzhou City with his straw hat. No one except Ning Kai knew that he had been here. No one knew where he was hiding and what he was preparing to do. Zhong Dejun died and Qinghe County began to feel uneasy. The famous gardens by the Fuchin River began to fear. Ning Kai did what he wanted to do and left Qinghe County for the Great Swamp. This was a very ordinary passenger ship. Compared to the ships of the South Jin Kingdom Navy patrolling around the Great Swamp, it was pitifully small. Even slightly larger waves would cause the ship to sway violently. This kind of passenger ship was very slow. It would take 2 days to cross the Great Swamp. The people who took this kind of ship were naturally ordinary people who had no money. The seemingly boundless Great Swamp, the rapidly dulling lake scenery, coupled with the unpleasant smell in the cabin where there was nowhere to hide, caused these people who were already somewhat numb to become even more numb. Only the sound of vomiting from time to time could let people know that this was a group of living people. Ning Kai sat at the end of the ship and did not go to the cabin to squeeze out a place to sleep with those people. The 2-day journey was not difficult for him. If he was not afraid of attracting attention, he would not even need to eat. The wind on the lake was very strong and there was a lot of moisture in it. He sat at the end of the ship and looked at the white foam on the surface of the lake. He did not feel poetic, but only silently thought about something else. His psyche power was feeling between heaven and earth. He did not want to alarm the cultivators in the South Jin Kingdom Navy. He was precisely controlled to the lake surface behind the boat, and some of it fell into the lake. On that windy and snowy day, he wrote that character on the snowy street and slashed thousands of times. From that moment on, even the drunkard and the butcher did not dare to step into Chang'an. However, he could not be trapped in Chang'an forever. He did not want to be a prisoner of Chang'an, especially after the news from Peach Mountain. He knew that he had to leave. If the world knew that he had left Chang'an, he would be greeted with endless assassinations. He might even see that flagon swaying in the lake wind on the ship the next moment. He needed to be able to write that character outside of Chang'an. However, people in the world today were as numb as the passengers on this passenger ship. They faced things that they could not escape with silence. Who could be the same as him? How could he write that character if there was no one else? Ning Kai looked at the seagulls on the lake and held the handle of the iron cutlass with his right hand. He thought about this question silently from day to night, and then to the morning light that shone on the lake. Still nothing. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 848. For cultivators, danger was often an opportunity. The greater the danger, the more likely it was for them to break through the realm. Master Huang Yang was enlightened when he encountered the horse gang in the western wilderness. The Abidine entered the legendary state of tranquility in front of thousands of knives in Chang'an. It was a risk for Ning Kai to leave Chang'an. But he had to come. He wanted to master the human talisman through this journey. The beauty of the lake and the influence of nature, the various states of the people in the cabin, and the contemplation of eating and sleeping all made him vaguely moved, but he was unable to put it into practice. 2 days and 1 night later, the passenger ship anchored at the pier of the South Jin Kingdom. The people in the cabin carried their luggage ashore and passed through the sharp shouts of the hawkers in the South Jin Kingdom before disappearing into the crowd. Since Wang Jinglu was not by his side, Ning Kai carried the iron cutlass on his back and the box with the iron arrows. It was naturally inconvenient for him to enter the city. He left the official road and climbed a mountain peak where few people visited. He found a mountain stream and took a bath. He caught a gazelle and roasted it to eat. Then, he slept peacefully on a tree. Many years ago, when he was still a teenager, he could live freely in the Min Mountain with Sang Sang on his back. Now that he had the Great Spirit, he could kill a tiger with a stone. Life in the wild, which was difficult for ordinary people, was not difficult for him. He could live comfortably. It didn't take long for them to see the outline of the city in the distance. Although it wasn't as magnificent as Chang'an, it was still one of the top cities in the world. Ning Kai became more cautious. He made some changes to his appearance, restrained his psyche power, and covered his snow mountain and ocean of qi with the Great Spirit. Then he walked on the official road. He waited on the official road for a long time and found the carriages of the prince's mansion. He quietly put the cutlass and arrows in the carriage and followed the carriages into the city. The reason why he was so cautious was not because it was the capital of the South Jin Kingdom, Lincoln. There were many powerhouses in the city, and there was an array on the city wall. It was because there was a lonely mountain not far from the capital. The sword garret was in that mountain. Ning Kai was confident in his current state, but he did not think he could withstand Liu Bai's sword for even a moment. He followed the caravan into Lincoln City. When they reached a quiet place, he retrieved the iron knives and arrows from the truck. The whole process was simple and no one noticed. According to his original plan, he planned to stay in Lincoln City for 2 days to get a feel of the people here and see if it would be helpful for his cultivation. Then he would leave. Since he was returning to the mortal world in search of fated chances, he wanted to feel the aura and power of the human world. Naturally, he had to get in touch with ordinary people, so he went directly to the eastern city. Similar to Chang'an, the eastern city of Lincoln was also home to the poorest people, and the poorest people were the most ordinary people, because poverty was always the norm in the human world. Before entering the eastern city of Lincoln, he had made some mental preparations. However, when he passed through the straight and luxurious Imperial Street and entered the short alleys, he still found that his mental preparations were not enough. He had thought that he had been living in the eastern city of Chang'an for many years and was used to seeing poverty. Lincoln was the capital of the South Jin Kingdom, but he did not expect that the poverty here was still beyond his imagination. The street was already extremely narrow, and most of the area was occupied by the residents' tents. It was extremely crowded, and one had to constantly avoid the protruding iron sheets as he walked. He also had to be careful not to be splashed by the urine of the people in the tents. It was a difficult task for anyone. Ning Kai stepped on the old bricks in the dirty water and walked with difficulty in the dirty air and noisy scolding. Suddenly, he smelled something greasy beside him. He turned his head and saw a woman in ragged clothes wiping a hot iron pot with a piece of meat in her hand. Several shirtless little boys covered in mud stood beside the iron pot and waited. Their little hands held the broken bowl tightly, and their eyes were shining. The sound of urine came from the toilet next to them, which was separated by an old cloth. After a while, the old cloth was lifted, and a girl walked out holding up her pants. There was no shyness on her face, only anger. She shouted at the little boys, "Is this for you to eat? Don't be greedy." Ning Kai looked at this scene, and after a moment of silence, he continued to walk into the depths of the dilapidated street. He had seen scenes that were far more sad and dark than what he was seeing now. However, since he came to the city of Wei, he had not experienced such a life for many years. At least in Chang'an, he would never see such a life. He walked very slowly, because the alley was narrow, and also because he wanted to see more. He squatted not far from a well at the corner of the street, and watched the women wash their clothes. He found that they did not use any soap powder, and they did not even use the washing hammer that was placed next to them. They just kept rubbing their white hands. A noisy chatter sounded behind him. He stood up to make way for the girl he had seen earlier to come over with a rice bowl. This bowl was relatively intact. The porcelain still had some color to it, and it was filled with white rice. The rice was covered with vegetables, and he could even see 2 pieces of grease on it. The little boys, who should be her younger brothers, followed behind her excitedly, and raised their arms to wipe their noses from time to time. They were probably thinking about how they could snatch a few mouthfuls of that rice bowl later. Ning Ke thought for a while and followed them. In the deepest part of this dilapidated market, there was the most dilapidated house. The girl brought her younger brothers to the front of the house, only to find that the front of the house was surrounded by children like them, all holding rice bowls in their hands. The younger brother stood on his tiptoes and looked at the rice bowls in the hands of other children. He turned to her and shouted, "Sister, Zheng Lily's family actually made braised pork. Red braised pork." The little boy's expression was extremely exaggerated. He danced with joy, and his face was full of disbelief and shock, as if he had seen the most ridiculous thing in the world. The girl listened to her brother's report, and her face became extremely ugly. She pushed through the crowd and looked at a girl of the same age, who was dressed in relatively better clothes, and said loudly, "It's my family's turn to cook today." Then she looked at the children holding rice bowls in front of the dilapidated house, and said with her eyes wide open, "It's my family's turn. If anyone dares to compete with me, I'll go and burn his house at night." There were more than a dozen children carrying rice bowls, and some of them were obviously older than her. Hearing this, they showed fear on their faces, and subconsciously stepped back. The girl of the same age as her was not afraid of her, and even took 2 steps forward. The reason for this was because there were 5 thick pieces of braised pork in her rice bowl, so her face was full of pride, just like the braised pork. She said, "How can these few pieces of rotten vegetables fill my teacher's stomach? If my teacher doesn't fill his stomach, how can he have the energy to teach us?" The girl's brother said softly, "Yes, sister, why don't we let the teacher eat braised pork, and let's share this bowl of white rice?" The girl elbowed the little boy out of the way, and walked in front of the girl holding the braised pork. She usually disliked this companion of hers, who was extremely arrogant because her 7th sister was married to a rice shop worker. At this time, seeing the cheap flower ribbon on her head, she was even more angry, and said, "Zheng Lily, you shameless fox, are you delivering food to the teacher or seducing a man?" Zheng Lily was so angry that her little face turned red, and she was not good at quarreling. Her hands began to tremble, but she was afraid that the braised pork in her bowl would fall to the ground, so she did not dare to tear the girl's mouth. The girl looked at her and snorted coldly. She raised her head and puffed out her obviously not fully developed chest, like a victorious hen, and walked towards the dilapidated house with the vegetables and rice in her hands. When she arrived in front of the dilapidated house, her expression suddenly became extremely respectful, and she said softly, "Teacher, the food is here." With a creak, the dilapidated house's door was pushed open from the inside. The sound made people feel that the door could fall at any time. A man walked out of the dilapidated house. The man's features were extremely clear, and he wore a thin, collarless shirt. His black hair was casually combed into a bun, with a chopstick stuck in it. His expression was calm and natural. He looked at the children outside the house with bowls of rice in their hands, and the hopeful expressions on their faces. He could not help but smile bitterly, and said, "Go back and tell your parents that we agreed to take turns eating. If you still insist on doing this, then I have no choice but to leave this place." Hearing that the man wanted to leave, the children looked as if they had heard the most terrifying thing. They hurriedly put the bowls of rice they had raised high into their arms, not knowing what to do next. Very naturally, all the children looked at Zheng Lili, because on the rice that her family delivered, there was braised pork. The man smiled slightly, took the vegetable rice from the girl in front of the door, picked up the chopsticks by the window that was separated by the waste bricks, squatted at the door, and began to eat. The girl stood proudly beside him, her little hands behind her back, looking extremely proud. Seeing that the children still refused to go home, the man said with a wry smile, "What are you waiting for? Hurry up and finish the food in your bowl. Class will start soon." Hearing this, the children looked at each other, and then burst into cheers. It should be known that the food in their hands was much better than what they usually ate, and they had been craving it for a long time. Only Zheng Lili did not eat the rice in her bowl. She walked in front of the man, looked at him with tears in her eyes, and said, "Teacher, just eat a piece of meat, just eat a piece of meat." The man smiled helplessly, and reached out his chopsticks to pick up a piece of braised pork in her bowl. Zheng Lili immediately smiled through her tears, and ran home with her bowl of rice. She still had a younger brother at home, so she did not dare to secretly eat something as delicious as braised pork. The man said with a smile, "Class will start soon. I won't forget." Zheng Lili said with a smile as she skipped away. The red hairband in her hair swayed back and forth, looking very cute. The girl standing behind the man clutched the corner of her clothes, and pouted. She was a little envious, but she had seen it when she went shopping in the market. The red hairband cost 2 copper coins, and it was not something she could afford. The man glanced at her, and said softly, "I'll buy it for you secretly." The girl smiled happily and nodded her head in agreement. Ning Kei stood outside the crowd. He looked at the dilapidated house, the children who came to deliver food, and the man who walked out of the dilapidated house. He was extremely shocked. He had seen this man before. At that time, the cold wind of the Hulun Sea was howling, and countless powerhouses had gathered. Even the eldest brother could not completely overshadow this man's brilliance. This man, whether he appeared in the West Hill Divine Palace, the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine, the palace of the secular world, or the ancient Lank Temple, was so proud, because he was the world wayfarer of Haotian Taoism, Yisu. However, hiding in the dilapidated house in the east of Linkong City, he was so calm, so ordinary, as if he had lived here for many years. What on earth happened? At this moment, violent curses and whips suddenly came from outside the crowd. A priest, under the protection of more than 10 guards, walked to the old house. The priest looked at Yisu, who was holding a bowl of rice, and asked coldly, "Who allowed you to teach here?" To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 849. The priest was fat and wore a robe made of silk. When he spoke, he covered his nose with his fingers. It was obvious that he was not used to the smell of dirty water in the street. Yisu asked, "Do I need permission to teach in Linkong?" The priest said coldly, "No one will care if you teach these children to work. But it is said that you will talk about the doctrine of Haotian at the end of every lesson?" Yisu said, "Yes." The priest looked at him and scolded, "It is an unforgivable crime for a non-priest to misinterpret the doctrine." Yisu thought for a while and put his bowl on the windowsill. He said, "If you want to punish me, I'll go with you." The priest looked at the tranquil expression on Yisu's face and felt greatly humiliated, because he wanted to see a weeping and repentant person. He was used to deriving pleasure from the role of a savior, so he felt very angry. He took the whip from the guard and lashed it at Yi Su's face. No one dared to stop him. Even the children who were holding their bowls and were very respectful to their teacher could only stand aside. Because he was the priest who represented the will of Haotian. Ning Ke stood outside the crowd, watching this low-level priest teach Yi Su a lesson for such a reason. Naturally, he felt that it was a bit ridiculous, thinking that this was really courting death. However, when the whip was lashed out, Yi Su still did not react. He stood in front of the dilapidated house with his head down, as if waiting for the whip to leave a bloody mark on his face. Ning Ke then remembered that Yi Su was defeated by second brother in the Battle of Verdant Canyon. His snow mountain and ocean of qi were destroyed. Now he was just an ordinary person, or even a useless person. He was no longer the powerful Haotian Taoism cultivator who carried a wooden sword and walked proudly in the world. Now he could not avoid this whip. Naturally, he could not avoid the many whips that would fall later. The genius of Haotian Taoism might die quietly in the hands of that mediocre person. Ning Ke was not going to make a move because he had no reason to. Even though he felt it was a pity that a person like Yi Su would die in such a humble way, he did not want to expose his whereabouts because of Yi Su. But when he saw the blind man holding a sword in the crowd, he knew that it would not happen. The whip broke in the dirty air and fell into the dirty water in front of the dilapidated house. The priest looked at the whip handle in his right hand in confusion, not knowing what had happened. Then 5 fingers on his right hand were broken. The whip handle fell down and blood flowed out. The white cross-section of the bones was like 5 periods painted in white, announcing his end. The priest looked pale. He looked at his right hand and saw the bleeding hand. He was trembling in pain, but he bit his lips and refused to make a sound. He was not the kind of person who devoted himself to Taoism and had a firm Taoist heart. The reason why he could bear the pain of his broken finger was that, like Ning Ke, he also saw the blind man holding a sword outside the crowd. From the moment he saw the blind man, the priest knew why the whip broke and why his fingers were separated from his body. He also knew that if he did not want his head to fall off, he had to bear the pain. The West Hill Divine Palace had a highly respected status in any country other than the Tang Empire. Ordinary nobles did not dare to offend the low-level divine priests. However, there was a place in the South Jin Kingdom where even the West Hill Divine Palace had to be respected. The low-level divine priests were no different from pigs and dogs in their eyes. That was the Sword Garret. The priest didn't dare to linger in front of the house any longer. He walked out of the alley with his head down with a dozen guards. When he walked past the blind man holding the sword, he almost wanted to hide his head in his pants. It was said that the emperor of the South Jin Kingdom was killed by the sword of this blind man. He did not think that his life and that of the guards were more valuable than the life of the emperor. Lu Yiqing walked to the front of the dilapidated house and bowed to Yi Su as a junior. He was now a powerhouse in the knowing destiny state. Yi Su was just an ordinary person whose snow mountain and ocean of qi had been destroyed, but he was still polite. "My master invites you to meditate in the pavilion again." Lu Yiqing said gently, "You are a pearl, why are you covered in dust?" "My master thinks that there are always ignorant and arrogant people in the world who want to do ridiculous things." Yi Su looked at the blind swordsman in front of him and smiled. This was the 3rd time that the Sword Garret had sent someone to invite him. He also knew what Lu Baichuan meant. Haotian Taoism and the academy had both suffered losses. The situation had changed subtly. The Jishou Abbey, which had been hidden for countless years, was no longer the unknown place that everyone worshipped. No matter in the cultivation world or within the West Hill Divine Palace, there were many people who wanted to kill or bully him in order to gain some spiritual power or self-recognition. He looked at Lu Yiqing and said, "I am just an ordinary person. Those who are still looking at me can't go far. Since that is the case, there is no need to pay attention to them. Lu Yiqing said, "Sir, you live in a shabby alley. How can you guarantee your safety?" Yi Su said, "There are many ordinary people living in this alley. I hope to live like them. If I can't, then it is probably Hao Tian's wish. Please thank your master for his kindness on my behalf." Lu Yiqing knew that it was not easy to persuade him. He shook his head helplessly and thought that even though Yi Su's state was destroyed and his words were not as arrogant as before, Yi Su was still Yi Su. Lu Yijian left with his sword as a walking stick. The shabby house became quiet again. The children looked at Yi Su with even more enthusiasm. They were used to seeing bloody conflicts in this street, so they could ignore the 5 fingers in the dirty water. But they knew that their master was indeed not an ordinary person. As the saying goes, children from poor families take charge of the household at an early age. Otherwise, how could Sangsang become the Sangsang she is now? The children in front of the dilapidated house used the wisdom of the marketplace to see that Yi Su was extraordinary. Instead of being scared away, they showed the cuteness of naive commoners and wrapped themselves around him. Yi Su did not care about the excitement around him. After the children finished eating, he took out a small blackboard from the shabby house and began to teach the children. It suddenly became much quieter. Ning Kei stood at the periphery and listened to Yi Su's calm and gentle voice. Watching him patiently explaining to the children, he suddenly felt that he saw the shadow of his eldest brother in Yi Su. The content of Yi Su's lesson surprised him. It had nothing to do with cultivation. At the beginning, he was talking about a way to weave hair flowers. Then, he began to draw pictures and taught the boys how to do carpentry. It was not until the end of the lesson that Yi Su talked about a simple doctrine. Ning Kei did not understand. As dusk approached, the voices of parents calling for their children could be heard from the depths of the alley. Poor people only ate 2 meals a day. Dinner was always a little earlier. If they were hungry, they could just go to bed and endure it. Yi Su waved his hand, indicating that the lesson was over. Then he walked into the shabby house with the small blackboard. The children bowed respectfully to the shabby house and then dispersed noisily. Ning Kei walked to the front of the shabby house and looked at the wooden door that could not even block the wind. He was silent. Logically speaking, he should not have walked in. However, what he was looking for was lucky chance. It was lucky chance that he suddenly met Yi Su in the dirty streets of Linкong City. He was originally going to die in West Hill. It was a great lucky chance that he met Yi Su before he died. He believed that he could kill Yi Su at any time. He took 2 steps forward and raised his hand to knock on the door. "Come in," Yi Su said in the shabby house. Ning Kei pushed the door open and walked in. There were only 4 walls in the shabby house. There was only a small bed and a water tank. There were many holes in the felt of the roof, which was bright from the twilight. Yi Su was surprised to see him. He said with a smile, "Why are you here?" Ning Kei said, "I was just wandering around. I didn't expect to meet you here." Yi Su invited him to sit on the bed and said, "This kind of thing has always happened randomly." Ning Kei said, "Who would have thought that you are hiding in a shabby alley and working as a teacher?" Yi Su filled a bowl of water from the tank and handed it to him. He said, "After the Battle of Verdant Canyon, I went to the Kingdom of Song first and then came here. I lived here for a period of time many years ago." Ning Kei took the bowl and thanked him. He asked, "Is it the legendary journey where you broke through the pass of life and death?" Yi Su said with a smile, "You can't see through life and death as long as you look at it. The pride I had in the past seems to be a bit ridiculous now." Ning Kei's current state was not enough to fully understand this sentence. But he vaguely felt that although Yi Su's state was destroyed, he seemed to have surpassed the past in some aspects. Yi Su asked, "Why did you come to the South Jin Kingdom?" Ning Kei said, I was just passing by. I am going to the West Hill Divine Palace. After the Battle of Verdant Canyon, Yi Su became a useless person and was no longer a cultivator. Naturally, he did not care about the affairs of the cultivation world. He did not know that the West Hill Divine Palace was going to hold the right to light, nor did he care. Ning Ke thought of the scene when he was teaching and asked confusedly, with your state and knowledge, as long as you are willing, it would not be difficult for you to teach the South Jin Kingdom's Imperial Examination Champion or a powerhouse in cultivation in a few years. Why did you teach those things before? Yi Su said, if you want to cultivate, you need talent. There are not many talented students in Lingang City. Even if there are, they would have entered the sword garret. As for why I teach those children to weave flowers and do carpentry, it is because these skills can help them earn money in the shortest time possible and then they can eat more. Ning Ke thought for a long time and finally said two words, I admire you. Yi Su said, if you want to admire me, you should admire your eldest brother. He taught in the marketplace many years ago. What I am doing now is nothing new. Ning Ke said, eldest brother is that kind of person, but you did it halfway. That is even more admirable. Yi Su said, I lived in a small Taoist temple in Chang'an City for a while. I like the feeling of the true meaning in the marketplace. Now I am also looking for my own peace. Why should I admire you? Ning Ke's hand, which was holding the bowl of water, slightly stiffened when he heard the words, there is truth in the marketplace. He looked at Yi Su's eyes and asked very seriously, can you teach me these? It was supposed to be 2 chapters, but I have an emergency to report. I will attend an event of Shengda literature on the 11th. I will try to finish it as early as possible. If one day doesn't work, I will come back after 2 days. I do not want to stop updating, so I have to save up some manuscripts. Today there is only 1 chapter. Then I recommend a book to you. The title is Forging Immortals. The author is a recruit carrying a spear. The book number is 2466815. The number of words is more than 1,000,000. It is very full and very serious. Please support me. If you are interested in Xianxia and cultivation novels, you can try it. Thank you. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 850. Yi Su looked at him and said with a smile, I learned something from your senior brother, so I should teach it to you. But I have to pay for it. What do you want to learn? Ning Ke looked at the bowl in his hand. The water in the bowl was like wine. He was silent for a long time, and then he began to tell the story that happened last autumn. The thin snow on the city wall of Chang'an fell like a curtain. The Abbey Dean encountered thousands of knives when he entered the city. The snow and the sky began to burn, burning a piece of blue sky. He wrote a word in the blue sky. Yi Su was now an ordinary person and did not walk in the cultivation world. He did not know many things. But the sword garret had already informed him that the Abbey Dean had entered Chang'an. Since you can write that word, you are invincible in the city. Even the headmaster was defeated by your knife. But if you come out of the city, you will die if the headmaster looks at you. Ning Ke admitted it and said, I want to know how to be equally powerful outside of Chang'an. Yi Su said, you are the first divine talisman master to write that word. Yen Sei did not do it, nor did countless predecessors. So no one can teach you, not even me. Ning Ke asked, how to gather more people's wills. Yi Su said, the most common method or expression is naturally the word faith. Ning Ke said, I think so too. But I don't want to follow the old path of Haotian Taoism. Yi Su said, so you took a great risk to leave Chang'an and travel in the human world. You are still following the old path that I took when I wanted to see through life and death. Ning Ke did not quite understand what he meant. That day, your senior brother sat by the pond and read a book. He did not look at my sword at all. Then I realized that to see through it, I still needed to look. The word look was inferior. Later, I meditated in a small Taoist temple and saw the broken eaves. Then I understood the principle of breaking and building again. Finally, I understood that the cycle of life and death is natural. Yi Su recalled the sword on the snow-capped peak in the wilderness and the scholar by the pond. He looked at him and said with a smile, "So I could take Jun Mo's sword in front of the verdant canyon." Ning Ke asked, "What does this have to do with my current confusion?" Yi Su said, "You are writing words that no one has ever written before. You are walking on a path that no one has ever walked before. I said that no one can teach you. All I can do is to show you the process of my cultivation comprehension. I will crush it for you to touch. It is not up to me to decide what you can comprehend from it." After a moment of silence, Ning Ke said, "Please continue." Yi Su said, "Back then, when I traveled to different countries to see through the trial of life and death, I was still a bystander. But now, I've become a disabled man and returned to the human world. I've come to the shabby streets of Lingang City, and I've become a participant." Ning Ke recalled how he looked at the streets and alleys on the city wall of Chang'an and how he looked at the numb passengers in the cabin on the Great Marsh passenger ship. Only then did he realize that he was still a bystander. Yi Su looked at him and continued, "You don't want to follow the old path of Haotian Taoism because you instinctively hate the existence of religion. However, you have forgotten that religion is indeed a belief, but not all beliefs are religions, at least not all religions like Haotian Taoism." Ning Ke thought for a moment and said, "I agree with this statement. You should be very clear that except for those powerhouses with divine skill in Haotian Taoism, the higher the state the cultivator is, the harder it is to keep his mind clear. In other words, the more powerful the person is, the harder it is to have faith. Faith is not above the vault of heaven, but in the humble dust. To put it simply, faith is the most unshakable thought and desire of ordinary people. If you want to use faith to gather people's will, you need to first figure out what they want." Yi Su said, "Now that my snow mountain and ocean of qi have been destroyed, I have become a real ordinary person. I don't have the ability to think about the profound truth, but I have the opportunity to live an ordinary life and understand the thoughts of ordinary people. For example, the belief of the children in this street is just to eat." Ning Ke thought of the scenes he had seen and nodded. Yi Su looked at him and asked, "You haven't eaten yet, right?" Ning Ke saw him eat a big bowl of green vegetables and said, "It doesn't matter if you don't eat." Yi Su said, "See, this is where you are different from ordinary people." Ning Ke understood what he meant and asked, "Do you have noodles at home?" The dilapidated house was really bare. Although there was an old pot and stove, it was extremely difficult to find rice and noodles. Fortunately, Yi Su was now very respected in the street, so someone brought a bowl of plain noodles to him after a while. Ning Ke finished the soup and noodles and put the bowl and chopsticks on the windowsill. Suddenly, he thought of something and asked, "Since you want to live an ordinary life, why do you need those children to send you food?" Yi Su's answer was very simple and very convincing, "I can't cook." Ning Ke couldn't refute this explanation, so he asked again, "Previously at the entrance of the alley in front, I saw those women wash clothes without using soap powder. I think they are poor, so why don't they even use the washing machine?" Yi Su's explanation was still very convincing. The washing machine can indeed wash clothes more cleanly, but the clothes in their homes are not made of good cloth, so they may be damaged after a few times of washing. Ning Ke said, "The people here really live a hard life. Do you have to live in such a difficult environment to experience the feelings you want to experience? Isn't it a little too self-torture?" I have just started to understand and learn in this aspect, so I can't give you a direct answer or a clear direction. I can only tell you some of my vague judgments for your reference. Yi Su said, we have said before that faith can be used to gather the will of the people. In fact, there is no problem with this saying in reverse. The strongest and most unified will of human beings will inevitably become faith, so we actually only need to know what people want the most. Human beings are very good at hiding their true feelings, because exposing them is sometimes like taking off armor, which means danger. In an ordinary day, in a warm and comfortable environment, it is difficult to find out their true desires and thoughts. If you ask them what they want, it is difficult to get an answer. Only in the desperate period of life, in the extreme background, those answers will jump out by themselves and appear extremely clear. No matter if they are numb or Philistine before, their behavior is always so honest. Ning Ke thought of the bravery of the people in Chang, and on that snowy day and fell into deep thought. Yi Su continued, what you said before is wrong. It is not that we have to be in a difficult environment to understand these things, but that difficulty is the normal state of the human world. I didn't go to Chang'an, but came to Lingang, because the Tangs live too freely and beautifully, which is not a treatment that everyone can enjoy. In Lingang, I've seen the most extravagant nobles, the poorest citizens, the most arrogant priests, and the most miserable slaves. Wealth and poverty seem to be inborn and cannot be changed. This makes me start to think about a question. Why can't these things be changed? The twilight spilled into the house through the hole in the roof, as if plated a layer of warm red luster on Yi Su. It did not feel sacred, but it was so intimate. He looked at Ning Ke quietly and said, in the doctrine of Haotian, everyone is guilty and needs to repent, so that they can be saved by Haotian and enter the divine kingdom of light after death. But in the long decades of life before entering the divine kingdom, do believers have to bear the hopeless torture of poverty? I have never been to the divine kingdom of Haotian, so I don't know if it is as beautiful as described in the scriptures. But I know that the human world under the divine kingdom is not beautiful. Then, if Haotian's compassionate gaze does not fall on the human world, or if it is testing the human world, what should Haotian believers do? Should they kowtow to the West Hill Divine Palace and wait for the final salvation, as they have done for countless years in the past? Everyone is guilty, but what is the sin of believers? Greed for material things? Desire for wealth? Longing for freedom? Unable to obtain peace because of these things? These are all desires that human beings can hardly get rid of. If these are all sins, then they are the original sins that cannot be completely erased. For these sins, the Buddhism sect requires meditation and takes the path of restraining desires. Taoism, on the other hand, is based on believers' belief in Haotian, and requires believers to turn these desires into offerings. The bridge between them is faith. Only the Academy has never restrained these sins. Yi Su said, these are all reasonable, but they all have shortcomings. The Buddhism sect does not look at the present world and only places their hope in the next world. The Taoism sect does not look at the reality and only places their hope in the divine kingdom. The Academy sets the law of the Tang Empire, but it still plays the role of a leader. It requires too much of one's own accomplishment. These days, I have been thinking whether there is any other way to make the human world full of original sins better. Ning Ke looked at him and asked, what is it? Yi Su said, Haotian will save us at the end of our lives, but who will save us at the stage of life extension? We must save ourselves. Ning Ke was silent for a long time and said, so you teach those children? Yi Su said, this is just the beginning. Ning Ke looked at his eyes and said, according to the doctrine, only Haotian is qualified to save the world. Your current thoughts and actions are already considered blasphemy by Haotian. Yi Su said, Haotian loves the world. How can he not allow the world to save itself? Ning Ke looked at him in the twilight and did not know what to say. As time went by, if this person really succeeded in preaching, perhaps this street full of sewage and garbage would become a holy land of Hautian Taoism in the future, because he would become a sage. Of course, it was more likely that this former world wayfarer of Hautian Taoism would be tied to a wooden frame by the priests in red and then burned into a charred corpse. Yesterday, I said that I would save the manuscript, but I only wrote a few hundred words. This chapter is too difficult to write. My original idea was to create something like a new religion, but I found that I am not capable enough. No matter how much I read about religious history, it is useless. Without that ability, I will not do it. In the future, I will only write pictures and not these things that I cannot understand. Then I am going to go out. I can only try to write as many updates as possible until the 12th. When I come back, I will work hard to write to satisfy everyone. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 851. Preaching in the streets was Yi Su's self-redemption, and he would lead the world to self-redemption. For the Hautian doctrine that had been maintained for tens of thousands of years, this change seemed small, but it was actually a revolutionary change. The worship of Hautian would be replaced by the new doctrine, and the yearning for the divine kingdom would be replaced by the love for the world. That was why Ning Ke was shocked. Yi Su looked at Ning Ke and said, "Preaching is actually the process of gathering people's hearts and unifying their beliefs. I'm still trying to figure out how to do it. There are more precedents in the classics of Hautian Taoism. If you are interested in this, you can go to the book hall of the Divine Halls of West Hill. There are many books there." Ning Ke stayed in Lingang and discussed and studied with Yi Su. The more they talked, the more he admired Yi Su. He found that this man who lived in a shabby house was like a whetstone that had been sharpened countless knives. He was gentle on the surface and firm on the inside. There were many rough edges that could not be seen by the naked eye. He ground the scriptures and the classics into powder and turned them into his own ideas. During the discussion these days, Yi Su did not express his opinion on how Ning Ke could write that word. Just like at the beginning, he calmly talked about what he had learned in this life and what he had learned from traveling around the world. Yi Su was well-read and had studied the classics since he was a child. Ning Ke had learned the Taoist theory systematically. During the discussion, Yi Su proposed an interesting hypothesis. If Hautian was the rule of the world as the headmaster had said, then how did the cold and objective rule come to life and power? He thought it was most likely from the people's belief. Ning Ke thought it was reasonable, but it did not make sense when he thought of the everlasting night that would appear every tens of thousands of years. Apart from the discussion, Yi Su taught the children in the streets every day. He taught them carpentry, weaving, and winemaking. He also told them some stories from the classics. It was midsummer, and it rained frequently in Lingang. The street was full of temporary buildings and old houses that had not been repaired for a long time. Under the heavy rain, houses collapsed every day. Yi Su took the children everywhere to save people, helped repair the eaves that had been damaged by the rain, and even began to plan a comprehensive renovation of the street's drainage system after winter. Because the disciples of the Sword Garret would come occasionally, Ning Ke seldom walked out of the shabby house. Naturally, he did not help with these things. He just quietly observed the whole process and gradually learned something. In the end, the rainstorm lasted for 3 days. Just when everyone was exhausted and on the verge of despair, the rain suddenly stopped and the sky suddenly cleared up. Countless cheers resounded in the rain-soaked streets. Yi Su carried the medicine box and walked back and forth between the houses. There were too many mosquitoes after the rain, so he was very vigilant about diseases. Ning Ke emptied the 3 broken bowls in front of the bed and looked up at the sun through the hole in the ceiling. He thought silently, "Why did you suddenly stop crying?" When Yi Su returned to the shabby house, he was already very tired. He handed the bowl of vegetable rice to Ning Kei and said, "I don't feel well today. You eat first." Looking at his pale and thin face, Ning Kei thought that his current body was even weaker than that of an ordinary person. If he persisted in this way, he would probably die before becoming a sage. "I don't want to eat anymore." He looked at the porcelain blue sky through the broken roof and said, "I have to go." Yi Su said, "I have nothing else to teach you. You really should leave." Ning Kei looked back at him and frowned slightly. Yi Su smiled faintly and said, "Don't worry. Pity is a delicious poison to you right now. I won't hate you just because you wanted to kill me." Ning Kei thought for a while and said, "I still think it's a pity to kill you." Yi Su said, "If I spread the news that you left Chang'an, then no matter how smart and studious you are, you can only write the word death in the end." Ning Kei said, "I hope that you can live, and I think you should also hope that I can live." Yi Su asked, "Why?" Ning Kei said, "What you are doing and what you will do is very interesting. Of course, you will face very difficult situations in the future, so you should need me." Yi Su didn't say anything and just smiled. Ning Kei looked at his eyes and said seriously, "You need the Tang Empire and the Academy." Yi Su still didn't answer him and said, "Since you don't want to kill me, then pay the tuition fee before you leave." Ning Kei didn't take it as a joke. He took out a banknote, counted one and handed it over. Yi Su took it and saw that it was a banknote with a denomination of 100 taels of silver. He said with a smile, "The rumor that you and that person are as greedy as your life seems to be true." Ning Kei said, "The tuition fee for those students is just a few bowls of green vegetable rice. Isn't it enough for me to pay 100 taels of silver?" Yi Su said, "A bowl of green vegetable rice with oil dregs is more important to those children than 100 taels of silver to you. Don't forget that it's white rice." Ning Kei thought about it and found it reasonable. He said, "Then I'll pay more." Yi Su said, "Help me buy something." Ning Kei returned to this street from the market. He stepped on the broken bricks in the sewage and squeezed through the crowded shacks like he was dancing. He came in front of a house. A few muddy monkey-like little boys were holding bowls of sorghum rice and eating happily. His mother stared at the thinning skin tied on the stove and was worried. The curtain in the corner was lifted and the girl walked out with her pants up. She looked at her mother and said, "The teacher said that he wants you to buy me a belt." Her mother said angrily, "Didn't he just cut a cloth belt for you last night? You are wild on the street every day. Even the strongest cloth belt will be broken by you. Where else can I buy one?" Ning Kei stopped the girl who looked unhappy and handed the things in his hands to her. The girl was still very young, but she seemed very sensible. She took the things and asked, "Who are you?" Ning Kei looked at the little girl's messy hair and said, "I am a friend of your teacher. He asked me to buy this belt and the hair flower that he promised to give you." In Lincoln in midsummer, the heavy rain had just stopped and the heat came. The air was so humid that the sewage on the ground couldn't be evaporated in a short time. It gave off an unpleasant smell. Yi Su saw Ning Kei off to a secluded place outside the street. Ning Kei turned to him and said, "The little girl is very happy. Do you have other ideas?" "She is Huan Zi. She is a girl," Yi Su said. Ning Kei said, "Why so serious?" "I was just joking before I left." Yi Su said, "I don't know you very well." Ning Kei said, "I know her very well." Yi Su asked, "Who is she?" Ning Kei said, "Your sister." Yi Su felt that he had heard the two words before. Then he remembered that he also heard the two words when he asked Mr. First where Ning Kei learned the Day sword many years ago in the snow city of Chang'an. People in the academy can be really annoying sometimes. He looked at Ning Kei and said, "So I still don't understand why you don't want to kill me." You used to be annoying too. But you are fine now. Although I have never been afraid to kill, I need a reason or emotion to kill. Ning Ke told him what he had done in Qinghe Prefecture and then said, I asked Wu Dao to kill Zhong Dajuan to help Guanhai solve some problems. At the same time, I wanted to intimidate Qinghe Prefecture and vent my anger. Most importantly, I wanted to tie the Buddhism sect, or at least the Lank Temple, to the academy. But when I met you in Lingang, I thought of another possibility. Maybe the future of Haotian Taoism lies in you. Then why should I kill you? Ning Ke didn't go far before he heard the sound of children reading in the street. To be more precise, they were not reading, but reciting the method of knitting hair flowers. He turned to look at the street and saw mist rising in the twilight. The sound of children's voices could be heard. He couldn't smell the stench from a distance. He could only see the picture, which was beautiful in a different way. Yi Su had integrated some ideas of the Buddhism sect and the academy. Coupled with his experience in the small Taoist temple, he had his own view of the world. But he had betrayed Haotian. Before the verdant canyon, he had already betrayed Haotian. In Chang'an, the Abbey Dean had also betrayed Haotian. Truly powerful people, even the most devout believers of Haotian, would find their own way one day as long as they were willing to think. Everyone will leave you. Ning Ke looked up at the sky of Lingang and said to her. He didn't get any direct wisdom from Yi Su these days. But he at least understood one thing: to become a sage in the human world, one couldn't ask for help from sages. After leaving Lingang, Ning Ke didn't enter the city again. He only walked in the mountains. It was peaceful all the way until he was close to the West Hill Divine Kingdom. He used a cloth belt to make a hammock between the sturdy branches. When night fell, he rested sideways on the hammock. Accompanied by the cool summer breeze, he soon fell into a sweet dream. All of a sudden, the crackling of firecrackers came from afar. He woke up with a start. He rubbed his eyes and looked down at the foot of the mountain. He saw firecrackers everywhere in the small village. He was confused. It wasn't the New Year, nor was it a festival. The rite to light would take many days. Why were the villagers setting off firecrackers? Could it be that someone had died? Even if someone died, it was impossible for every household to set off firecrackers. When the faint sound of firecrackers came from afar on the mountain ridge, Ning Ke knew that something must have happened. His expression gradually became solemn. He suddenly noticed that the moonlight in the forest was a little dim. Or maybe it was just a little dim compared to the usual moonlight. Ordinary people wouldn't notice it, but for him and those from the academy who often looked at the moon and scolded the headmaster, it was very dazzling. Ning Ke looked up at the night sky, and then he couldn't move his eyes away. One of the bright moons in the night sky was missing at some point. I hope I can come back tomorrow night, but it's unlikely. The day after tomorrow at the latest. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 852. Last year, when the headmaster of the academy ascended to the sky by the Sisui River, there was a heavy rain that lasted for dozens of days. On the night when the rain stopped and the clouds dispersed, a bright moon appeared and shone on the world. No one had ever seen the moon. Only the Ming hand scroll of the tomes of Arcane had made an obscure prophecy about this. After reading the Ming hand scroll, Buddha made a clear declaration in his notes. Night falls and the moon appears, which meant that before the arrival of the everlasting night, a thing called the moon would appear in the world. With the silver light shining on it, how could the everlasting night be called night? It was inevitable for human beings to panic about the unknown. However, human beings also had a very tough or sad characteristic. When they found that some things could not be changed, they would accept it in the shortest time possible, bear it silently, and soon get used to it. When people found that the bright moon in the night sky seemed to not disappear, they quickly accepted its existence. The imperial astronomer began to observe the trajectory of the moon, trying to infer misfortune from it. Poets began to write many new poems to praise this beautiful bright moon, and some people even began to worship the moon god. Since the moon seemed to be so stable and full of solemn beauty like everything else in the world of Haotian, then let it continue to exist in the night sky. What did they need to worry about? All these feelings were based on the premise that the moon was stable. In fact, it was stable. From the day it appeared, it had not changed at all. It was always full and bright. When the night came, it would always appear in the fixed night sky on time, and its position had not changed. Everything would be different from tonight onwards. The bright moon would become dark, as if the sky was sunny and cloudy. The full moon would become smaller, as if it was missing a piece. The face of the moon was changing quietly, and everyone on the ground could see it. The sound of firecrackers rang through the world for more than 10 nights. Sparks flew in countless towns and villages. People looked at the night sky in horror and kept beating gongs and drums, for fear that the moon would fall from the sky. They did not know whether these loud sounds were cheering for the moon or emboldening themselves. People prayed to Haotian and worshipped the moon god. Only Ning Ke, who walked in the forest, did nothing. He looked at the moon silently every night, his face full of worry. He had seen the waxing and waning of the moon countless times, so he was not as alarmed as the others. However, he did not understand why this moon would also waxing and waning. He was very worried that something had happened to his teacher, who was fighting in the sky. "Are you hurt? Can you still hold on?" Ning Ke arrived at the West Hill Divine Kingdom. This was his second time coming here. The previous time, he had only followed his teacher around in the carriage and didn't have much of an impression of this place. Thus, he still felt a little strange. Along the way, he did not see anything worthy of praise except for the devotees who kowtowed devoutly on the mountain path. Even the food here was much worse than that in Chang'an and the Song Kingdom. It was not until he came to a place not far from the West Hill Divine Palace that he saw the towering Green Mountain, the 3 cliff plateaus between the mountains that seemed impossible to be carved by human hands, and the several towering divine halls between the cliffs. Only then did he truly feel the unique solemnity of this sacred country. In the world of Haotian, Haotian Taoism had unimaginable authority and resources. The Jishou Abbey was aloof from worldly affairs. The West Hill Divine Palace was the political and power center of this world. Even if the Tang Kingdom had appeared in the past 1,000 years and the Academy had appeared in the south of Chang'an, this fact could not be changed. There was still a long time before the right to light. The West Hill Divine Palace had become extremely vigilant. Because of the war, the believers who held the road deeds of the Tang Kingdom and the Great River Kingdom were searched very carefully. Only after passing 3 checkpoints could they reach the foot of the mountain of the West Hill Divine Palace. Ning Ke naturally did not hold the road deeds of the Tang Kingdom. He used the identity of the Song Kingdom. There were 4th brother and 6th brother in the back of the mountain of the Academy, and they were the best at forging all kinds of documents in the world. What really made him a little wary was the 3rd checkpoint. To be more precise, it was the old priest who was resting on the bamboo chair with his eyes closed. The old priest was wearing a brown robe. He should not have a high position in the divine hall, but even the red-robed priest who was in charge of the inspection showed great respect to him. This old priest was responsible for finding cultivators who tried to sneak into the divine hall. If he did not have some special Taoist law, he must have entered the knowing destiny state to find all the cultivators. Ning Ke really could not imagine that Haotian Taoism could casually find a powerhouse in the knowing destiny state to take charge of such an ordinary task after suffering such heavy losses in this war. He looked at the towering divine hall in the distance and thought that it was indeed Haotian Taoism that had ruled the world for tens of thousands of years. No one knew how many great figures were hidden in this mountain. As he thought of this, he just walked over. The old priest in brown who was lying on the chair did not respond at all. His eyes were still closed, and he seemed to be sleeping more soundly. During the battle with the Abbey Dean in Chang'an, the god-stunning array poured a large amount of qi of heaven and earth into Ning Kei's body. At that time, his state was raised to the peak of the knowing destiny state in a very short period of time. After the battle, the qi of heaven and earth flowed out of his body and returned to the streets of the city. His state returned to the knowing destiny state again, but now his real combat ability was much more than that. He was a real powerhouse who was close to the peak of the knowing destiny state. Most importantly, the qi of heaven and earth in Chang'an did not completely leave his body. After all, there was still a trace of it left in his body. For the 1,000-year-old city, a trace was not enough to make a difference. But for a cultivator, the primordial qi was unimaginably abundant. When Ning Kei had secluded himself in the precipice of the back mountain of the academy, he had completely mastered the method of cultivating the Great Spirit. After being taught by third sister Yu Lian, he was even more adept at it. The remaining qi of heaven and earth in his body was slowly turning into his own Great Spirit as time went by. Now the water droplets condensed by the Great Spirit in Ning Kei's lower abdomen had already become a pond. It seemed to be inexhaustible in battle. It was even easier to use it to cover his snow mountain and ocean of qi and disguise himself as an ordinary person who could not cultivate. Not to mention the old priest on the chair, even if the hierarch of the West Hill Divine Palace came in person, he might not be able to see anything wrong. That was why he dared to return to the mortal world alone and go straight to the West Hill Divine Kingdom. The imperial court of the Tang Empire and the academy had made ample preparations for Ning Kei's trip to the West Hill. There could not be any problem with his identity. The letter in his arms was really written by the Abbey Dean of the Baiyun Taoist Temple in the Kingdom of Song. The priest in charge of logistics in the Revelation Institute looked at Ning Kei softly after reading the letter. He said, "Since it is a recommendation from my senior brother, it is not appropriate to reject it. You should work hard in the book hall, especially during this period. You must behave yourself and do not go out at will." Ning Kei thanked him and put the expensive gifts with the Kingdom of Song's characteristics in the corner of the room. He bowed to the priest and went to the book hall with the approval letter. He was now a servant of the Revelation Institute, responsible for cleaning the book hall. The deacon in the book hall threw him a bunch of keys and said a few things to pay attention to. Then he ignored him. The identity of a servant was hard to attract anyone's attention. When the other disciples of the academy began to discuss, he chose this. He also wanted to stay in the book hall because it was where the headmaster used to stay. Many years ago, the book hall of Haotian Taoism played an important role on the Peach Mountain. But now it was no longer the same. It was even directly under the Divine Hall of Light and handed over to the Revelation Institute to manage. Ning Kei looked at the deserted Taoist hall and the classics on the bookshelves. He thought about the changes in the book hall and could not help but sigh about the decline of Haotian Taoism. It was hard for the disciples of the academy to imagine that the book hall was so deserted. If one did not want to study, he would naturally decline. How could a place where no one wanted to study not decline? This book hall had produced many great figures. 1,000 years ago, the headmaster of academy and the great divine priest of light who founded the devil's doctrine used to clean and sort books here. But what about now? To sigh for Haotian Taoism was like worrying for the ancients. It was meaningless. He collected his thoughts and picked up a broom and a rag. After some simple cleaning, he began to read. Yi Su had said that there were many Taoist classics here and that he could spend some time reading. He liked reading and judging from the current situation, no one would disturb him. Because of the war against the Tang Empire and the right to light, some students of the Revelation Institute were in the Qinghe Kingdom, some were in the South Jin Kingdom, and most were busy on the Peach Mountain. Ning Ke hid in the book hall and read for a few days. He did not meet a single person. He kept reading the books he needed. Time passed slowly. Sometimes, he even felt that he had become a scholar. But that was not the case. When his eyes occasionally left the paper and looked at the divine hall on the mountain, it was very complicated. Two girls stood in front of the divine hall of light. The two girls were still very young. They wore white clothes and their appearances were ordinary. However, those who saw them would find it hard to shift their gazes away, because they were extremely white. Every inch of their skin was exceptionally white, without a single blemish to be found. It was like snow, and their expressions were exceptionally pure like water. In the distance, the deacons and priests of the divine hall who were busy looked at the two girls in white with curiosity and awe. The two girls in white were selected from more than 100,000 girls in the West Hill Divine Kingdom. According to the decree of the Hierarch Lord, they had the same status as the saintess. Therefore, no matter how curious the people in the divine hall were about them or about the divine hall of light, no one dared to ask. The people in the divine hall rarely saw the two girls because they were always in the divine hall of light. They rarely stepped out of the divine hall, which made them very mysterious. But today, they stood outside the divine hall. What were they waiting for? On the mountain road at the foot of the Peach Mountain, smoke and dust suddenly rose. Several carriages were moving at an unimaginable speed toward the divine hall, as if they were charging. The people in the divine hall were shocked. What happened? Was the war going to start again? All kinds of good. Good chapter title, good plot, good pun. I like it. He 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 he. Tomorrow's update will definitely be late at night. I don't know when the plane will arrive. I haven't bought the tickets yet. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 853. The West Hill Divine Palace was not an unknown place like the Jishou Abbey or the Xiankong Temple, but it was not in the mortal world either. Because in the eyes of ordinary believers, it was the divine kingdom on earth. Today, several horsemen came from the foot of Peach Mountain at a high speed, as if they wanted to bring some news from the mortal world to the divine kingdom. Naturally, no one laughed. The priests and deacons of the divine hall began to check, and they were not surprised to see a very high-ranking waist token. When they found that these knights and several carriages had returned from Chang'an, they could not help but become more and more serious. They looked at each other with a surprised expression. Is the war really going to start again? The carriages continued to the Peach Mountain under the protection of the cavalrymen of the Divine Hall. Smoke billowed all the way until they stopped in front of the Divine Hall of Light in front of the cliff yard. The two girls in white clapped their hands gently. Dozens of deacons walked out from the side of the Divine Hall of Light. They carried a pile of green cloth and pulled it to the front of the hall. These green cloth curtains were about 3 people's height and very long. They surrounded the entire square in front of the Divine Hall. Even if someone looked from the white Divine Hall at the highest point of Peach Mountain, it would be difficult for them to see what was behind the green cloth curtains. Now, there were only cavalrymen and carriages returning from Chang and behind the green cloth curtains. Those travel-worn people did not have time to salute the two girls in white. They opened a carriage and helped a person out. A girl in white looked at the divine priest in charge of this mission and asked in a childish voice, "Are you sure it's not wrong?" The divine priest said solemnly, "It's definitely not wrong. We used the old people in the Southern Gate Temple and confirmed that this person has been in Lin 47th Street all these years. The girl in white looked at the middle-aged man beside the carriage and nodded with satisfaction. The middle-aged man's greasy clothes and laborious hands revealed his ordinary identity. He looked very nervous at the moment. An ordinary Chang, a citizen who had never seen the world, had been tricked and kidnapped outside the city. Then, he had traveled day and night. When he got out of the carriage, he found himself in the divine kingdom of Haotian's believers, the West Hill Divine Palace. Who wouldn't be shocked? In fact, it was not easy for him to support himself with the carriage. He was also a believer of Haotian. Logically speaking, when he suddenly found out that he had come to the West Hill Divine Palace, other than fear and confusion, he should also be a little excited. However, the war between the West Hill Divine Palace and the Tang Empire had just ended. As a Tang, he felt that it would not be a good thing to welcome him. Another girl dressed in white asked the priest, "Did you bring back the other thing?" The priest was the most loyal subordinate of the Divine Hall of Light. Until now, he still did not know what task he was carrying out, but he could vaguely guess that it must be related to the biggest secret of the Divine Hall. He took a few cautious steps forward and took out an object wrapped in cloth. He said in a low voice, "The tomb was too close to the academy, so we did not dare to act rashly. The old brush pen shop was also guarded, and the courtyard wall was demolished a few months ago. Fortunately, the object was buried under the rubble and was not found. We finally got it back after paying a price." The West Hill Divine Palace had sneaked into Chang'an and wanted to take back something from the old brush pen shop. He said it lightly, but everyone knew that the price must be very heavy. The girl dressed in white took the object wrapped in cloth and slightly lowered her arm. The object seemed to be a little heavy. She did not ask anything else and signaled the divine priest to lead all the subordinates out of the green curtain. Then, she walked in front of the absent-minded man and said, "Let's start." The middle-aged man asked blankly, "Start doing what?" A girl dressed in white said, "Do what you are best at. Don't say that you can't do it well. All the materials you need are in the carriage, even the pots and stoves have been moved here." Only then did the middle-aged man know what they wanted him to do. He was even more shocked and confused. Did they kidnap him from thousands of miles away to the Divine Hall just for this? This matter was too strange. However, he had to bow his head when he was under someone else's roof. Now that he was in front of the Divine Hall, he did not dare to say anything when he saw such a vast array of people. He obediently took out the pots and pans, stoves and all kinds of materials from the carriage and began to work. The people of the West Hill Divine Palace did not leave out anything. The pots and pans, the stove, the flour, scallions, chili oil, vinegar, and even the firewood were all the things he had used in the past 10 years. The firewood was ignited and smoke came out of the old stove. Water was poured into the basin. The flour became thin, then gradually thickened and then thinned again. It was obviously inappropriate to use it to make steamed buns, and even more inappropriate to use it to make noodles. The kitchen knife fell on the not-so-clean cutting board. He chopped the scallions and coriander into small pieces. Then, he began to add seasonings such as soy sauce and vinegar into the bowl. The girl dressed in white said, "There can be no mistakes, no matter the amount or the order." The middle-aged man thought that he had made hundreds of bowls every morning for the past 10 years. How could he make mistakes? However, that was what he thought, but he didn't dare to say it. At this time, the water in the pot finally boiled. The dough in the basin was torn into irregular shapes by his hands and thrown into the boiling water one by one. It quickly took shape and began to float. He dipped the blackened spoon into the pot and stirred it. When he took it out, it was filled to the brim with cooked slices of dough. The white shards trembled lightly like fish fat. There was not a single piece left in the pot, and the spoon was exactly 1/3 filled with soup. Such craftsmanship was naturally the result of repeated practice for more than 10 years. The soup was poured into the bowl. An unusually strong but refreshing sour and spicy aroma appeared in the square in front of the divine hall of light. Then, the smell of chopped coriander and scallions assailed the nose. The two girls dressed in white did not show any expression. They looked down and walked back into the divine hall. One of them held the bowl in her hands, and the other held the thing wrapped in cloth. The middle-aged man said subconsciously, "One bowl is not enough for the two of you, right?" The girl from the old brush pen shop used to eat one bowl and bring back 2 bowls when she was so thin. The two girls dressed in white ignored him and walked into the divine hall. The middle-aged man looked at the boiling water in the pot and held the big spoon in his hand. He stood in the empty square in front of the solemn divine hall, feeling very nervous. Not long after, a girl dressed in white came out of the divine hall of light. She handed several things to the middle-aged man and said, "Someone will send you back to Chang'an." After saying this, she went back into the divine hall of light and did not come out again. The middle-aged man was stunned for a long time before he remembered to look at the things in his hand. They were a perfect luminous pearl and an elixir that gave off a faint fragrance. Although he was an ordinary person, he could feel that these 2 things were extraordinary. He became more and more frightened. He had always been proud of his craftsmanship, but it was not worth it. The nobles of the divine halls of West Hill had kidnapped him from Chang'an to the Peach Mountain and given him a luminous pearl and an elixir. Just for a bowl of something worthless? Was there such a delicious sour and spicy noodle soup in the world? The green curtain was removed. The carriage drove down the Peach Mountain, stirring up the dust again and returning to the mortal world. Ning Kei held a bag of rice in his hand. He looked at the carriage and frowned. He did not know that the carriage came from Chang'an. Like the rest of the people in the divine hall, he had many doubts. He turned around and walked back to the Revelation Institute through the side door. He did not look at the divine halls on the mountain. It was not because he was cautious, but because he did not want to look at them too many times to suppress his desire. She and that idiot that he was looking for were there. However, there were even more dangers. Before he was fully prepared, before that point in time, he did not want to take a step closer to the temple. He left Chang'an and came here with the determination to die, but he did not want to die. The Revelation Institute was very quiet. He walked back to his room and prepared to cook. Looking at the bag of rice, he suddenly wanted to eat a bowl of noodles, a bowl of fragrant fried egg noodles. He stood in front of the stove and kept silent for a long time. Then he began to cut the scallions and took out the eggs he bought in the town at the foot of the mountain. He heated the oil, fried an egg, and cooked a bowl of noodles. A bowl of noodles with fried egg noodles, with 4 Sichuan peppercorns and 30 scallions. He held the bowl and walked to the depths of the book hall. He looked at the clouds and cliffs, thinking of the city of Wei and the old brush pen shop, and began to eat the noodles. He ate very quickly, and in the end, he even drank all the broth at the bottom of the bowl. He had not cooked for many years, but his cooking skills did not fall behind. The fried egg noodles were still delicious, but he actually did not enjoy it because she did not cook it. He stood there for a long time until the moon appeared. The beautiful moon in the night sky had returned to its original fullness. But he was still worried because he did not know if the moon would continue to waxing and waning tomorrow night. He was also worried about other things. That emotion was more like fear. Aren't you omniscient and omnipotent? Why don't you know I am here? Why, can't I feel where you are? Are you really not my natal life anymore? Or is the you I am looking for really dead, and the you now is not you? He thought to himself as he looked at the divine hall on the peak where no light leaked out. Behind the divine hall of light was the cliff behind the mountain. Below the cliff was the legendary U prison. The clouds and fog became thicker at night, as if there was a cold and evil aura overflowing. She stood between the stone pillars and the cliff with her hands clasped behind her back. She looked indifferently at the bright moon in the night sky. Her plump and tall body was tightly wrapped in a green cloth, reflecting a lonely figure on the ground. The moon had been missing for more than 10 days and began to return to its full state. Her face became paler and paler, not holy and solemn, but weak. Behind her were hundreds of wine jars and a bowl of hot and sour noodle slices soup that she had only taken a mouthful of. Beside the bowl was a square object. A corner of the cloth on it was lifted, revealing the gold bricks and some brick dust inside. The wine was Jiujiang double-distilled liquor, and the hot and sour noodle slice soup was from Chang'an. The gold brick had been hidden in the wall of the old brush pen shop all these years. These were useless memories she hated the most, so she had to get them back. Or, it was like this. There's a big bug. Regarding the moon's waxing and waning, I mentioned a few strokes earlier, but I forgot to write them myself. I always thought that I didn't write them, and was happily waiting for this moment to play with this stroke. I didn't expect that I would play myself into a fool. From my original intention, I have already corrected the 2 places I found earlier, and I sincerely apologize to everyone. The day before yesterday, he didn't sleep for an entire day and night. It was the first time in his life that he felt airsick. The journey was tough, and he wouldn't go out for a month even if he was beaten to death. He would write his book and live happily with everyone. According to the schedule, the report was updated as follows: 2 chapters tomorrow, 1 chapter the day after tomorrow, and 2 chapters the day after that. Along the way, I had a great time writing. They were all my favorites, and I was very satisfied with the chapter names. Just like the day before yesterday, if I don't continue to praise myself, I can't keep my eyes open. Finally, there's one thing that I want to report again. There are some very beautiful sentences in Jiangyi, which I have seen everywhere. I really can't find the original author, so there's no name. I can only state the source, such as the fish leaping into the sea, the flower blooming on the shore, or that spring, I cut a few caddies of peach blossoms, or that thyme stew, which I will use in the future. I've reported these before, but I dare not falsely claim this honor. But some readers may not notice, so I'm reporting it again. The original authors are awesome, and I'm a hardworking porter. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 854. Sang Sang looked at the moon in the night sky. When the moon was waning, she was as powerful as she had been in the past countless years. When the moon was full, she felt unprecedentedly weak, or in other words, she felt her own weakness in the divine kingdom. That person once said that the moon waxed and waned, and people had their ups and downs. Then what about her? From the moment she fell into the snow-capped peak in the far north, she wanted to leave the human world and return to her own kingdom because she sensed danger. She was in danger both in the divine kingdom and in the human world. However, the gate of the divine kingdom had been destroyed. How could she go back? Tonight, on the Peach Mountain, different people looked at the same moon and thought about different things. Some wanted to leave, some wanted to stay, but they didn't know if they wanted to see each other. She stood on the balcony behind the divine hall of light for a long time until the moon disappeared and the sky in the east of the mountains turned white. The morning light sprinkled on her, but she still didn't leave. The morning clouds were covered with strange colors and were blown away by an unknown wind, revealing the red and warm sun. She bathed in the sunlight and slowly squinted her eyes. Her expression was peaceful and beautiful. She was the rule of this world and also the ruler of this world. She fell into the human world and gradually became immortal. She didn't need to cultivate and only needed to bask in the sun. Although she didn't know if the red sun was real or fake, the light and heat were real, and they were the source of her power. As for the wine and dishes, they were just nutrients that her body needed, or more importantly, they were needed to weaken her consciousness. Now she was very plump, or in other words, very fat. Her body stretched the cyan dress with flowers. She was very white and tall, which was completely different from her appearance in the past 19 years. However, her eyes didn't change. They were still thin and long like willow leaves, and extremely clear. She squinted and became even thinner, like the willow leaves by the Yanming Lake in Chang'an. But it didn't mean that she could still see everything in front of her when she closed her eyes. The red sun leaping out of the morning glow, the filamentous clouds in the flowing wind, and the thin waterfall between the cliffs all appeared in her bright eyes. She saw birds flying back and forth between the cliffs, cubs in the distant mountains, reefs appearing in the distant seawater, and the heat of the sun turning the seawater into steam. All of these scenes represented the rules at work. The rules of this world could not be shaken and appeared very stable. Therefore, the world also appeared very stable. The chi of heaven and earth and all matter were distributed very evenly. She was the rules, so she felt very satisfied. There was still no expression on her face, but in the deepest part of her eyes, one could almost see the intoxicated expression of a human. She was intoxicated by the harmony between herself and the world. She continued to stand on the balcony at the back of the Divine Hall of Light, looking at the scenery that kept changing, but in fact remained the same. She did not leave, until the night came again, and the moonlight shone again. The moon tonight was different from last night, and she did not like it. The moon waxed and waned. She did not experience any misfortune or fortune, but she felt the aura of birth, old age, sickness, and death. It was an aura that she hated, because it was an aura that only humans could feel. Because of this feeling of hatred, the scenery behind the Divine Hall of Light suddenly became unstable. She hated it even more. The sound of the wind blowing through the trees was like thunder in her ears. The waterfall falling into the clouds seemed to be silent, but in her ears, it sounded like someone was beating war drums. She could no longer enjoy the peace she liked. Even if she threw all the wine jars behind her down the cliff, she could not change the fact that she had drunk all the hard liquor in the jars. I plan to go out for a walk. She looked at the bright moon in the night sky and said. The two girls in white kneeled behind her, too shocked to speak. They had never seen the Saintess leave the Divine Hall of Light since they came to Peach Mountain. The people in the Divine Halls of West Hill had never seen the Saintess face. Why did she suddenly want to leave? Where was she going? The next morning, a very ordinary carriage stopped in front of the Divine Hall of Light. The big black horse poked his head out of the hall and looked at the two war horses from West Hill in front of the carriage. His eyes were full of killing intent. He wanted to let the two war horses know the difficulty and retreat, so that he could create an opportunity. She walked out from the depths of the Divine Hall and glanced at him. The big black horse hurriedly took a few steps back and bent his front hooves. He knelt on the frozen ground of the Divine Hall and grinned foolishly. He looked very obedient and even servile. She sat in the carriage and closed her eyes to rest. A girl in white waited on her in the carriage. The other girl in white waved her whip and drove the carriage away from the Divine Hall of Light and down the Peach Mountain. The more ordinary a carriage was, the more conspicuous it would be in the solemn Divine Hall. But strangely, it seemed that none of the priests or deacons saw the carriage, nor did they hear the sound of the hooves or the whip of the girl in white. The carriage quietly went down the Peach Mountain like a ghost. The carriage did not stop at the foot of the mountain. It continued forward for more than 10 miles, crossed a stone bridge over a small river, and came to a small town. Then it stopped in front of a shop opposite the Taoist hall of the town. Ning Ke woke up early in the morning. He first practiced a set of bladesmanship to warm up. Then he sat cross-legged in the morning fog and meditated for a while. He began to breathe in and out, borrowing the abundant qi of heaven and earth in the Peach Mountain into his body and turning it into his own great spirit. The whole process was carried out very carefully. The morning fog was still there when he finished. He walked up the path behind the book hall. He could smell the faint fragrance of flowers in the fog, and he could not help but feel refreshed. At this moment, the red sun had completely risen and the mountain fog suddenly disappeared. He found thousands of peach trees were in full bloom beside him. He could not help but frown in disgust. Years ago, the headmaster of academy climbed the mountain while drinking and cut down all the peach trees. Since then, the peach trees here had never bloomed again. However, this spring, the eternal lamp in the divine hall of light suddenly went out, and the peach trees on the mountain bloomed for no reason. They never withered again, even in the middle of summer. He loved the peach trees in front of the academy because they were brought back by the headmaster of academy from the Peach Mountain. He did not love the peach trees in the West Hill Divine Palace because they represented the departure of the headmaster of academy and that matter. There seemed to be a path in the depths of the peach trees, but he did not know where it led. Ning Ke walked towards it and suddenly felt the mountain wind suddenly became cold. The petals on the branches kept trembling, as if it had suddenly come to winter. There was a very powerful tactical array hidden in the peach trees. No wonder the headmaster would kill these peach trees when he climbed the mountain. Ning Ke thought about it and decided to quit immediately. With his current state and attainments in talisman Taoism, it should not be difficult for him to quit since he was not deep into the tactical array. But it was impossible for him to continue forward and break the array. However, at this moment, he suddenly felt a very familiar aura in the peach trees on the mountain. He could even vaguely understand the intention of these peach trees. He did not know anything about tactical arrays, but he knew that this was the key to break the array. These peach trees were blooming for him. If it were someone else, he would definitely be shocked and confused by this sudden change, and then have the idea of temporarily retreating. But he did not, because he quickly figured out the reason. The peach trees on the mountain were blooming because of her. How could they stop him? His sleeves brushed against the peach trees, and the petals fell unfragrant. He did not need to look for the direction, nor did he care about the powerful tactical array in the peach trees. He just walked according to the feelings of the peach trees. It did not take long for him to walk through the peach trees, which were extremely dangerous for cultivators. Outside the peach trees was a precipice. He stood on the edge of the cliff and looked at the towering divine halls above. Only then did he realize that he had reached the mountainside. Then he looked at the opposite side and found that there was another precipice there. The cliff he was standing on was part of the Peach Mountain, and the precipice on the opposite side was also part of the Peach Mountain. It was obviously under several divine halls, but for some reason it was independent of the Peach Mountain. The two precipices were dozens of feet apart. There was no bridge between them except for the mountain wind. Below them, there were clouds and mist, and there was a faint cold aura. No one knew how deep it was. A distance of dozens of feet was not far for cultivators, especially for cultivators from the Devil's Doctrine. However, looking at the ground on the edge of the cliff and the moss on the opposite precipice, it seemed that no one had ever been here, and no one had ever appeared on the opposite precipice. The two precipices had never been connected. The two precipices looked at each other in silence for tens of thousands of years, and no one knew if they had ever hated each other. A chilly wind blew from the bottom of the precipice, and the clouds and mist dissipated slightly. There seemed to be something on the opposite precipice. Ning Ke's eyesight was excellent, and he seemed to see several rows of stone windows. He was a little uncertain, and continued to look. When the next mountain wind blew, the clouds and mist dissipated again, and he found that there were indeed stone windows on the precipice. Could it be the legendary U-prison used by the Westhill Divine Palace to imprison traitors? He looked at the opposite precipice and frowned slightly. He looked for a while longer, and suddenly closed his eyes. Tears flowed from the corners of his eyes. It was not because he pitied the predecessors of the devil's doctrine who had died in the U-prison for thousands of years. It was also not because he thought of the great divine priest of light who had been imprisoned in the U-prison for more than 10 miles. It was also not because of the bloody smell and gloomy aura coming from the stone window on the precipice that made him feel pity. It was because his eyes were very painful. There was nothing in front of him except for the mountain wind, but at that moment, it was as if there was an invisible finger gently touching his eyes. The force was very gentle, but the eyes were the most delicate part of a human. Even though he had almost mastered the Great Spirit, he still felt a piercing pain, and he could not help but shed tears. After a while, he opened his eyes and looked at the precipice again. Then, he closed his eyes and began to cry again. This time, he shed more tears, because the force that fell into his eyes was even stronger. He was sure that the aura that touched his eyes came from the precipice. He knew that if he continued to look, the counterattack from the precipice would become stronger. There was a big tactical array between the precipices, which could prevent anyone from peeping into the U-prison. No matter if one was standing dozens of feet away, or thousands of miles away, as long as one looked at the precipice, one's eyes would be touched. No one could avoid it, because when one looked, it was not one's eyes that fell on the precipice, but the image of the precipice that entered one's eyes. The power of the tactical array would follow. This tactical array was called eye-catching. There will be 2 chapters tomorrow. Recently, the updates have been more ordinary, but I am quite satisfied with the writing. However, I will not write a single chapter. It will be Monday soon, so please vote for it. Thank you. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 855. Ning Ke was not allowed to look at the precipice, but Ning Ke insisted. He stared at the clouds between the precipice and the stone windows that were faintly discernible. His eyes became more and more sore. Finally, it was as if he had been stabbed by thousands of swords. He closed his eyes and began to cry, looking extremely sad. When he opened his eyes, they were already red and swollen. He did not know the name of the tactical array between the precipice, but he had truly experienced the magic of this tactical array. He thought to himself that Haotian Taoism was indeed the #1 sect in the world. It was extremely profound. Even though it had shown signs of decline over the years, at least it could not be seen around the Westhill Divine Palace. The tactical array between the precipice was to prevent people from peeping into the U-prison. As long as one kept a sufficient distance, or did not insist on looking through the clouds, it would not cause too much damage. Ning Ke was not afraid. He thought that the tactical array of the Westhill Divine Palace was so powerful, and the tactical array of the Jishou Abbey must be even more amazing. Eldest brother had gone to the Jishou Abbey in late autumn last year. If Chen Pippi had not done something in the Jishou Abbey, it would have been difficult for Ning Ke to enter the abbey, not to mention that the tomes of arcane in the Jishou Abbey had held up the abbey dean for such a long time. He wondered how Chen Pippi was doing now. He looked at the flowing clouds and the bright sun between the Peach Mountain cliffs and missed his best friend in the world. Then he thought of Chen Pippi's father, the abbey dean who had been hacked out of Chang'an by thousands of knives. He did not know whether the abbey dean was dead or alive. Neither the Tang Empire or the Westhill Divine Palace had any news of him. He did not know if the great man had returned to the Jishou Abbey, or if he had become a cold corpse in the straw mat on the way home. Ning Ke had never met his youngest uncle. The Abbey Dean was the most powerful human being he had seen after his master. Recalling the battle on the snowy street of Chang'an, he was still in awe. If such a powerful human being were to disappear quietly in the long river of history, he would welcome such an ending, but he would also feel regret. He left the cliff and passed through the peach trees to return to the book hall of the Revelation Institute. He looked around for old Divine Hall maintenance files, trying to find some clues about the tactical array on the precipice, but to no avail. By the time he woke up from the sea of books, it was still early, but he felt hungry. Only then did he remember that he had not eaten breakfast today. He walked to the kitchen and looked at the rice and vegetables, but he did not feel like eating. Ever since Sang Sang grew up, he rarely cooked. Especially now that he was in the West Hill Divine Palace. Every time he stood in front of the stove and looked at the brilliant Divine Palace outside the window, he felt annoyed. However, people always needed to eat. Even with his current realm, it was not a big deal for him to not eat for more than 10 days, but his psychological and spiritual needs had to be satisfied. At this moment, he remembered that last summer, when the headmaster of the academy took him and Sang Sang to travel through the West Hill, he took him to eat something good. Outside the town, there was a stone bridge with flowing water. The scenery was clear and beautiful. One could see the Peach Mountain more than 10 miles away when they looked up. However, this was not the right path, so there were not many believers who came to visit. There was an old man with a face full of wrinkles in the shop opposite the Taoist temple. There were a few iron buckets sealed with yellow mud at the door of the shop. Some of the broken rims of the buckets gave off a sweet fragrance. The old man was drinking. His yellow calloused fingers pinched a handful of peanuts and chewed them from time to time. The wrinkles on his face were full of black ash, which had been floating out of the iron buckets for decades and could not be washed clean. An ordinary horse carriage stopped in front of the shop. The girl in white stared at the iron buckets curiously, wondering what kind of sweet potatoes were roasted inside. How could they be so sweet and fragrant that people would eat them on such a hot summer day? Even the saintess had to leave the Peach Mountain to buy them. They came a little late, and the roasted sweet potatoes were bought by 2 deacons of the Revelation Divine Hall. So they had to wait outside the shop, which was a little boring. Sang Sang sat in the carriage. She did not feel bored. To her, boredom was a boring emotion that only human beings would have. Time was just the order of things, and it had no meaning. Moreover, her time had always been useful. For example, when she looked at the steam and fragrance coming out of the roasted sweet potatoes through the curtain, she was actually feeling the rules of heat, or in other words, she was feeling herself. If someone knew what she was doing now, he would definitely think that she was very narcissistic. But in fact, she did not even have the feeling of narcissism. More than 10 papal cavalrymen of the Divine Halls of West Hill escorted a divine priest. They passed by the town, and it seemed that they were going to cross the stream and go straight back to the Peach Mountain. That divine priest was He Ming-chi. He studied under Li Qingshan, the nation master of the Tang Empire. He was the most important person of the Divine Halls of West Hill in the Tang Empire. The Night of Blood and Fire in Chang'an was one of his means. Most importantly, he destroyed the God-stunning array in Chang'an. According to the hierarch's reward, he alone was more important than all the cavalrymen of the Divine Halls of West Hill. The Divine Halls of West Hill knew that He Ming-chi was the one that the Tang Empire and the Academy wanted to kill the most. Even when the Divine Halls negotiated with the Tang Empire, they did not include his safety in their conditions. Because they knew that the Tang Empire, especially the Academy, would never accept this condition. Therefore, for the sake of safety, the Divine Halls sent He Ming-chi to the south to hide for a while. Only now did he return to Peach Mountain. Sang Sang looked at He Ming-chi in the distance through the curtain. She did not show any emotion on her face, but she did not know why her body was filled with extreme hatred. She knew that this person was extremely loyal to her, and he was the trusted subordinate of the hierarch's loyal dog. He would be given an important position when he returned to the divine halls, but she still hated him. In fact, she did not know why she hated the ant in the red robe. But she did not accept this reason. So she thought that she did not know, so she did not know. The sweet potatoes were finally baked. The old man squinted and took out 3 hot sweet potatoes with his bare hands. He did not seem to feel the heat from his fingers. After wrapping them in paper, he handed them to the girl in white standing in front of the shop. The girl in white took out money from her waist and put it down. Then she returned to the carriage with the hot sweet potatoes. She lifted the curtain and handed 1 sweet potato in, and then handed the other 2 to her companion. The whip was crisp, and the wheels sounded gradually. Then it suddenly stopped. The girl in white stopped the carriage. Because she felt the irresistible will from the carriage, she and her companion sat quietly in front of the carriage, waiting for what might happen. After a while, a young man in the uniform of the Divine Hall's handyman walked to the front of the shop. He looked at the old man and asked, "Has your shop really been open for 1,000 years?" Ning Kei saw the ordinary horse carriage outside the shop, but he did not pay much attention to it. But when he saw the 2 girls who looked like they were made of snow, he could not help but think of his little black handmaiden. He silently thought that since they were working for the master, black was better than white. No matter how they cleaned, they would not look dirty, right? The old man squinted and said, "My grandfather's grandfather's grandfathers." Ning Kei did not want to hear him finish reciting the ancestral genealogy. He took out a copper coin and said, "Give me 3. The old man said, "My sweet potatoes are big. You can't finish 3. Ning Kei bought 3 sweet potatoes purely subconsciously. 1 for his teacher, 1 for himself, and 1 for Sang Sang. Hearing this, he understood and said, "Then 2 will be fine." The old man took out 2 sweet potatoes with his bare hands and handed them to him. He put away the copper coin and began to drink again. The headmaster of the academy once said that eating sweet potatoes in the hot summer had to be done while they were still hot, just like eating ice in winter. What they sought was the extreme of the extreme and the stimulation of the stimulation. Ning Kei was not a pure filial disciple. He had forgotten many of the words his teacher had said, but he remembered all the words his teacher had said about food. Because he insisted that compared to the title of the greatest man in the world, the title of the greatest gourmet in the world was more suitable for his teacher. He held the sweet potatoes and sat on the threshold. He pinched his fingers and tore the skin. The red and yellow soft potato meat was steaming and exposed in the deep summer air. The sweet smell spread around. He endured the heat and began to eat the potato meat. It was so hot that he kept sticking out his tongue. In the carriage, Sang Sang looked at the man on the threshold through the curtain. There was no emotion on her face. She was absolutely indifferent. However, she did not notice that the sweet potato in her hand had been crushed. She frowned in disgust and looked at the steaming potato meat. She raised her hand and took a bite. Then she began to eat again and again, as if she did not feel any heat at all. In the deep summer town, it was hot and quiet. Suddenly, the sound of cicadas came from the tree behind the house. They had just finished their afternoon nap and began to celebrate their reunion with their companions after an hour of separation. He sat on the threshold and ate the sweet potato. She sat in the carriage and ate the sweet potato. There was only a thin curtain between them. It was very quiet in front of the sweet potato shop. The old man drank several cups of wine and chewed 3 pinches of peanuts. He was slightly tipsy and began to hum with his dusty fingers while tapping on the barrel edge. Ning Kei sat on the threshold and listened to the song. Although it was simple, it was somewhat beautiful. Especially the lyrics, although ordinary, they were somewhat meaningful. Ning Ke gradually became entranced. Picking firewood with a knife, but afraid of frightening the moving mountain ghost. Rain falls on the banana leaves. Last year's cicada slew falls on the shoes. Hanging on the vines, the mocking laughter in the clouds comes from the mouth of the monkey. After years of idleness, the pottery model under the rotten leaves has accumulated old dust. In the Honglua winterfield, the white snow regards the paw print as a burden. Looking at the sky, the clouds and smoke dissipate like smoke. Ning Ke held the sweet potato and said in a daze, "Interesting." The old man became more and more proud of the guest's praise. His voice gradually became louder, but the tone suddenly became calmer, as if people in the countryside were talking. Cutting firewood to make a fence, planting 3 peach trees. Picking the grain as rice, and then making 2 jars of wine, as light as water. Picking flowers and twisting juice, making the bride's eyebrows drunk. Firecrackers sound, the old house cries new, never tired. Little deer cry, calling the maid to cut a few plums and heat 2 pots of wine. Remembering the childhood sweetheart, who could bear to give up a cup. Ning Ke thought of last summer, in front of this shop in this town, his teacher and her were still by his side. But now he was alone, and he could not help but feel sad. These 2 paragraphs are part of the spy's 27 cups of wine that I completed at the request of a reader a few days ago. For the full text, please read the comments section. I didn't pay attention when I wrote it, and only after I finished writing it did I realize that I was writing about coming night. Then, writing this chapter is really a bit tiring. I am not capable, but I have high expectations of myself, so I can only keep squeezing myself. There is still one more chapter today, and I don't know when I can finish it, so I am working hard. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 856. The plain lyrics were about the ordinary affairs of men and women in the village, without any heart-wrenching tragedy. But somehow, those beautiful scenes of the past made people feel a little lost at the end. Ning Ke had always thought that sentimentality was a luxury, especially now that he was in the Westhill Divine Palace, where his identity could be discovered at any time. So he did not let himself be immersed in this emotion for too long. He rubbed his eyes that were stung by the tactical array on the precipice, stood up from the threshold and walked out of the town. Sang Sang sat quietly in the carriage, listening to the old man's song. She was not moved at all, but her consciousness was stirred up, as if the ocean was about to rush to the earth. Every drop of seawater in the raging waves represented extreme hatred. She hated the young man outside the carriage, even more than she hated He Ming-chi. She frowned and pursed her lips. Her willowy eyes were as bright as a sharp knife. This was the first time she felt emotional since she came to the human world, so she hated him even more. Hatred would bring anger, and her anger was the wrath of heaven. Once it was angry, the world would change, the rivers would flood, and the people would lose their homes. No one could resist it. For some reason, she didn't want to kill this young man. More accurately, she didn't want to kill this young man right now. Thus, these past few nights, when she looked at the bright moon, she had been using unimaginable willpower to suppress the hatred and anger in her heart. Only the will of heaven could control the wrath of heaven. She hated him. She hated him. So she did not want to see him. She knew very well that once they met, she would hate him, and then she would not be able to suppress her will to destroy him. However, even she did not expect that she would meet him, hear his voice, and meet him in front of the sweet potato shop after leaving the divine hall of light for this town. Looking at his face and listening to his voice, she could no longer suppress her hatred and anger. A horrible aura gushed out from her plump and tall body and rushed to the sky. The summer sky was extremely clear, but suddenly, countless black clouds floated from thousands of miles away and covered the entire West Hill Divine Kingdom. The sky suddenly became very dark. The cold wind was blowing in the woods and the fields, swaying the signs, throwing debris on the streets, and the shouts of closing windows could be heard from the houses. The scene in the West Hill Divine Palace was even more shocking. Countless bolts of lightning formed in the black clouds like golden threads and then fell, producing countless dull thunders. With a boom, a muffled thunder struck down from the depths of the dark clouds. Over 20 miles away, a faint flame could be seen on the Peach Mountain, and even the crackling sound of peach blossoms burning could be heard. Fortunately, a torrential downpour soon followed, extinguishing the burning peach blossoms. On the 3 cliff plateaus of the West Hill Divine Palace, countless divine priests and deacons knelt in the rain, looking at the sky in horror and praying. She looked at Ning Ke through the curtain. Deep in her emotionless and cold eyes, there were stars being destroyed, worlds being reborn, and unimaginable majestic power. She had never really looked at Ning Ke since he came to the small town. She decided to look at him for the last time when the will of destruction was about to fall on the small town. Then she saw his eyes. Her eyes were red and swollen like peach blossoms, as if she had just cried. The unusually cold wind in the summer gradually stopped, and the majestic storm gradually subsided. Then, it disappeared without a trace. The tens of thousands of miles of dark clouds that covered the West Hill Divine Kingdom dispersed to the corners of the world. Ning Ke ran back to the sweet potato shop when it started raining. The thunderstorms in summer always came suddenly, and he had no doubt about it. He did not even notice that there was an aura in the horse carriage that shot up to the sky. After the headmaster of the academy left the human world, no one could feel such a level of aura. Weak and incompetent human beings. Sang Sang looked at his red eyes through the curtain and said emotionlessly. Then, she continued to eat the sweet potato in her hand and did not look at him again, as if they had never met. Ning Ke looked at the carriage that was moving further and further away in the rain. He did not know why he felt a little depressed. He looked at the back wall of the carriage that was drenched by the rain and vaguely saw the back of a tall and fat woman. He frowned and said with disgust, "Why is the girl in the carriage as fat as a pig?" The old man said, gossiping behind people's backs. "I don't know how your teacher taught you." Ning Ke did not answer until the horse carriage disappeared from his sight. Then he said, "She did not respond even after all this. It seems that she really did not hear it. She should be an ordinary person." The old man put down his cup and said with emotion, "So that's what you were thinking. When did the people from the academy become so cunning?" Ning Ke walked into the shop and took out the iron cutlass and iron arrows that he put here before entering the divine hall. He said to the old man with a smile, "I am not as capable as my teacher and uncle. Of course, I have to be careful." The old man said, "Of course. When the headmaster of the academy came to the Peach Mountain, my father and I baked sweet potatoes for him here. He came back before they were cooked. How can you compare? The West Hill Divine Kingdom was a place favored by Haotian. The 4 seasons were distinct and warm, and there had never been any natural disasters. The Peach Mountain where the Divine Hall was located was even more so. Even without the lightning-proof tactical array in the Divine Halls, there had been no lightning for thousands of years. That was why the thunderstorm today shocked many people. Except for the hierarch of the Divine Hall who had vaguely guessed the truth, the rest of the divine priests and deacons all knelt on the wet cliff platform and kept praying to the sky, begging Haotian to forgive their sins. The 3 cliff platforms were full of people kneeling, but still, no one could see the ordinary horse carriage slowly driving up the Peach Mountain, and no one could see Sang Sang and the 2 girls in white walking into the Divine Hall of Light. She stood in front of the cliff behind the Divine Hall, looking at the smallest raindrops that had turned into mist under her feet. She was silent as she thought of the man she saw in the small town. The gate of Haotian's divine kingdom was destroyed. She could not go back for the time being and could only stay in the human world. It was natural for her to hate humans, especially that man. However, only she knew that there should not be any emotional connection between Haotian and humans. There should not be love or hate. Once she started to hate humans, it meant that she began to have human emotions, just like when she looked at the table full of dishes in the capital of the Kingdom of Song and that immortal couple. She hated this kind of hate. She could predict everything in the world, but she could not predict her own future. Just like today in the small town, she did not know that she would meet him. But if she did not want to, how could she meet him? In a sense, Ning Kei's eyes were pierced by the cliff array, which saved his life in front of the sweet potato shop in the small town. But he did not know it himself. After returning from the small town to the Revelation Institute, he continued to search for information, trying to find a way to break the cliff array. He was now basically sure that the stone window between the clouds and the precipice was the legendary U prison. It was a place the West Hill Divine Palace used to lock up felons and traitors. For countless years, no one had been able to escape except for Sang Sang's teacher, Wei Guangming. According to the information he found in a book, the U prison had been set up by the previous powerhouses of the Divine Hall, and one of them was the eye-piercing that he had once felt. The precipice he cared about had nothing to do with the U prison. There was no one in the U prison who was worth his risk to save. The place he wanted to go was above the precipice. He wanted to go to the Divine Hall of Judgment at the top of Peach Mountain. Of course, this was only his last resort. The first place he wanted to go was the stables of the West Hill Divine Palace, which was on the third cliff plateau. To go up Peach Mountain, he had to go through the mountain path and 3 cliff plateaus. Ning Kei did not think that he could go straight to the West Hill Divine Palace with his current state. After all, he was not the youngest uncle or his teacher. If he really dared to do so, he believed that he would die in less than half an hour. Therefore, he could not go the usual way, but the dead end. Late at night, Ning Kei walked into the peach blossom forest. Even in the dark night, the thousands of peach trees in the mountain were still blooming pink and white. It was very beautiful. The peach trees that were struck by lightning a few days ago had already been removed by the deacons of the Divine Hall. They had returned to their original state. He walked among the peach blossoms, feeling a little strange. The peach blossoms all over the mountain were also a very terrifying tactical array, even more powerful than those on the precipice. Even a real powerhouse who had broken through the 5 states would find it very difficult to pass through the peach blossoms. Therefore, the Divine Hall did not need to set up any defensive power here. But for him, it was so easy to pass through, because the peach blossoms were planted by her. Every time he thought of this, he felt that things like fate were really hard to describe. When he came to the edge of the cliff, he did not look at the precipice, but jumped to the opposite side without hesitation. The 2 precipices were dozens of feet apart. Even the most powerful cultivators would see it as a natural moat. But for the powerhouses of the Devil's Doctrine and the cultivators at the peak of martial arts, it was just a shallow ditch. Ning Kei's great spirit had almost reached the advanced level. Except for third sister Yu Lian, Tang, and the Abbey Dean before he was injured, no one else could be stronger and more powerful than him. He did not need to run, nor did he use any strength. He bent his knees slightly, and the pond-like great spirit in his abdomen was suddenly sent to all parts of his body. Then he rushed to the opposite precipice. The night wind whistled and slapped his body, as if slapping a stone. In the blink of an eye, he came to the opposite precipice. His hands suddenly became soft and stuck to the precipice like cotton. Under his feet was a bottomless abyss, surrounded by clouds and mist, which looked even more gloomy and terrifying. The eye-catching tactical array on the precipice could not only block peeping eyes, but also the slightest fluctuation of a cultivator's psyche power. It was even more sensitive to the chi of heaven and earth hidden in the body of the devil's doctrine. In the moment before Ning Ke fell to the precipice, he withdrew most of the Great Spirit back to the pond in his abdomen, and used the remaining Great Spirit to cover his snow mountain and ocean of chi. To avoid triggering the tactical array on the precipice, he did not dare to use talismans. In other words, he completely relied on his own strength to climb the precipice. He was now an ordinary person. But even so, it was still not enough. Although he closed his eyes, the precipice seemed to think that he was looking. He felt a sharp pain in his eyes, and his hands that were grabbing the cliff stone suddenly loosened. There were cliff climbing in the Qing dynasty, among the guests, and also at night. Of course, he would not fall down, because neither the bottomless abyss nor the landmine tactical array had anything to do with Ning Quebec. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Qidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 857. First, about the character contest. I didn't want to waste your energy, so I didn't open the character contest. Later, I heard that many readers wanted to play it, and it was really free. So last night, I made 3 characters, all female characters. The best actress, Sang Sang, and the 2 best supporting actresses, Shan Shan and Yi Hongyu. If you are interested, you can vote for them. Please look at the homepage of Qidian or the related posts in the book review section. If you want to vote, I strongly recommend Sang Sang, because I am a fan of Sang Sang. Also, if you are a fan of Shan Shan or Hongyu, I will respect your opinion. I am just trying to get votes for Sang Sang. By the way, I said I won't get votes for monthly votes, but can I get votes for recommendations? As for the book review competition, there were already many excellent book reviews, but my announcement was delayed until now. I was so lazy that it made people's hair stand on end. The official announcement is as follows: announcement of the coming Night Cup Book Review Contest. Purpose of the event: in the past year, with the enthusiastic support of all readers, Coming Night achieved excellent results. It won the monthly votes of Qidian and won the best work of 2012. As of now, Making Night had reached the 5th volume. In order to repay the readers, to liven up the book review section, and to better interact with each other, the book review section and Cat's Making Night Bar had teamed up with YY55373 channel to hold the Making Night Cup Book Review competition. All readers, please participate. 2. Time and place of the event: submission time, 0:00 on April 1, 2013 to 2400 hours on May 11, 2013. Submission place, posting to Qidian Book Review section. Review time, May 12, 2013 to May 25, 2013. Award time, June 1, 2013, Saturday. Award place, Greasy Book Official YY553733. Description of the book review contest: for the time being, all the participating books will not be classified and will be evaluated together. If there are more than 25 doujinshi works in the book review contest, the doujinshi will be evaluated separately and additional doujinshi prizes will be added. It will not take up the quota of the announcement. At least one doujinshi will get the first prize, and the other prizes will be decided by the committee according to the number of works. 4. Prizes of the book review contest: 1. Grand prize, 100,000 Qidian coins, a set of Coming Night autographed books. 2. First prize, 50,000 Qidian coins each, a set of Coming Night autographed books. 3. Second prize, 30,000 Qidian coins. 4. 10 third prizes, 10,000 Qidian coins. 5. 20 encouragement prize, 3,000 Qidian coins. 6. 1 lucky prize, a physical autographed copy of Coming Night. Apart from the grand prize and first prize winners, a lucky prize winner will be randomly selected from all the participants. After the results of the book review competition were announced, the awards would be given out on YY, channel 55373. There would be a lucky draw and prizes would be given out at the venue. Rules of the book review competition. 1. The theme of the book review is Coming Night. 2. The title of the participating book review must be prefixed with Coming Night Cup, otherwise it will not be included. 3. All readers who like tricky works are welcome to participate in the book review. There is no limit to the number of fans, but the book review must be original and first published. 4. The venue of the competition is the review and comments section of Coming Night. Posting on behalf of others is not allowed. 5. The book review must be more than 200 words in any genre. There is no limit to the number of words in the poem. 6. There is no limit to the number of submissions for each participant, but only one book with the highest score can be awarded a third-class or above award. The other submissions can be submitted for the Encouragement Award. Note: if there are more than 25 doujinshi works, there will be a separate selection. At that time, the same reader can use different works to win awards in both book reviews and doujinshi. 7. Participating book reviews cannot be compared with the works of other authors. 8. Spamming and malicious attacks are strictly prohibited. Such comments will not be included. 9. If you find anyone violating the rules, you can report it to the organizing committee. Once it is confirmed, the violator will be disqualified. 10. Judges can participate in the competition, but their works can only be awarded with an encouragement prize. 11. Participants can communicate with each other in the Night Cup Book Review Competition participant group to understand the grading process and to make suggestions or complaints. The book review competition participant group number is 197,983,239. Please tell us your nickname before joining the group. 6. List of judges. Leader: something fishy. Summary of participating book reviews. Xia, that diligent laziness judged requirements. The scoring must be fair and have a clear conscience. Grading rules: grades will be given from 1 to 10 based on personal opinion. Grades can include decimal points. 7. Award method. 1. After the announcement of the list of winners, winners are requested to enter the Night Cup Book Review Competition participant group, number 197,983,239. Inform the Chidian ID and account number to the awarding staff, so that they can add the amount of Chidian coins into the account. Screenshot of the login page is required. 2. Physical book winners are required to inform the specific mailing address so that they can receive the fishy signed physical book. 8. The final interpretation of the competition belongs to the Book Review Competition Organizing Committee. If there is any omission, it will be added. 9. Special thanks to all readers in YY, channel 55373 for their enthusiastic support. Night Cup Book Review Competition Organizing Committee, March 30, 2013. Finally, I wish everyone the best. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 858. Many years ago, when the headmaster of the academy returned to Chang, and from his travels, he locked Ning Ke in a cliff cave in the back of the mountain. During that long period of imprisonment, Ning Ke learned many things in order to break through, including restraining the Great Spirit. That was why he thought that this cliff was nothing to him. But he forgot that the shocking array on the precipice could not only sense the fluctuation of the cultivator's psyche power and the change of the chi of heaven and earth, but it could also sense the peeping eyes. As long as someone looked at the precipice would enter that person's eyes. What was more amazing was that even if you closed your eyes and did not look at it, as long as you thought about looking at it, and did not completely suppress the idea of looking at the precipice in your consciousness, the precipice would still think that you were looking at it. It would be like a collapsing mountain, directly crashing into your eyes and then into your brain, setting off countless huge waves. Ning Kei's eyes were instantly pierced by tens of thousands of sharp Taoist swords. He was in extreme pain and his face became extremely pale. Then the ocean of his consciousness was hit by the cliff, setting off turbulent waves. The pain was so intense that even a strong-willed person like him could not bear it. His eyes darkened and he loosened his fingers, falling down the cliff. The cliff was shrouded in night fog. Below the clouds was a bottomless abyss. No one knew what was on the gloomy ground that never saw daylight all year round. The most important thing was that it was too high. No matter how strong the cultivators of the devil's doctrine were, they could not completely ignore the power of the earth. The empress had died after jumping off the city wall of Chang'an. Even Yu Lian, the grandmaster of the devil's doctrine, had broken all the bones in her legs after falling from the sky. The cliff Ning Kei was at was not much different from the sky. If he fell into the abyss like this, he would definitely be shocked to death by the earth. His body rubbed against the cliff, making a rustling sound. The cool night wind whistled past his ears. He fell faster and faster. The situation was extremely dangerous, and death was right below him. While falling, Ning Kei thought of many things, not those sweet or sour memories, but the cultivation skills he had learned. He wanted to find a way to stay away from death. However, the cultivation methods of the academy and the devil's doctrine required him to use his psyche. Once he used his psyche, the shocking array on the cliff would continue to attack him. He could not bear the pain and climb up the cliff. How could he not be moved, but still act accordingly? No matter how he looked at it, this seemed impossible. How could he control his body without thinking? In any case, his eyes still hurt even with his eyes closed, so he simply opened them. If he was really going to die, he would watch the world die. He stared at the rapidly ascending cliff in front of him. He did not feel any despair in his heart. Instead, he laughed at himself because of the arrival of death. The surface of the precipice wasn't smooth, but it didn't have many cracks either. As he passed by at high speed, the lines gradually turned into blurry blocks of color, as if they were about to flutter in the night wind. Ning Kei felt that he had seen such a scene before. The clothes swaying in the breeze and the soft lines were also carved on the stone. He remembered that they were the stone statues of venerables in the temple under the Wanyan Tower in Chang'an. There were also the stone statues of venerables in the side hall of the Lank Temple. His eyes brightened slightly, and his hands that had been pressed against the cliff suddenly became gentler. It was not the gentleness of before, but a gentleness that was close to nothingness. As he fell, in the whistling night wind, he suddenly put his hands together. His right index finger bent slightly in the air, and his left index finger fell on the back of his right palm, forming a mudra. Such a gentle pair of hands, looking at the shape of his hands, could not grasp the mudra on the cliff, but it produced an extremely magical effect. His falling momentum suddenly stopped, and he suddenly stopped between the precipices. It seemed like a long time had passed, but in fact, it was only a moment. He slid down more than 100 feet along the precipice, and his feet seemed to step on the clouds that covered the stone windows. Years ago in the Lank Temple, he had watched the stone statues of venerables for a night in the autumn rain and understood the Buddhist sect's four emblematic gestures of fearlessness, dhyana, exorcism, and dispelling thoughts. After that, he had used it several times when fighting against the powerhouses of the Buddhism sect, because compared to the Great Spirit and the primordial 13 arrows, the emblematic gestures of the Buddhism sect were not as powerful. It was not until tonight when he was facing the danger of life and death on the precipice that he remembered it. His body was suspended between the precipice, and he felt that there was a very strange aura slowly swimming in the clouds below him. His sense of perception was still constantly stirring up violent waves. Without any hesitation, he closed his eyes again, and at the same time spread out his hands that were put together. He calmed his mind, and his right hand formed the dhyana, and his right hand formed the dispelling thoughts. He gently landed on the precipice, no longer looking at anything in the world, and no longer thinking about anything in the world. He completely forgot himself and heaven and earth, and only started to climb up based on the first thought that was reflected in his mind. He entered into an absolute emptiness, and had even forgotten the existence of himself and the precipice. Naturally, he did not know that he was climbing up the precipice. Like an ignorant leaf, he slowly moved up. After an unknown period of time, he finally climbed to the top of the precipice. His hands fell on the flattened ground and automatically dissipated. He opened his eyes and found himself standing on the cliff plateau. Looking back at the gloomy abyss, his calm face gradually turned pale, and his clothes were suddenly soaked in cold sweat. He had encountered countless dangers and tests of life and death in his life, but today's encounter on the precipice of Peach Mountain still terrified him. The process of climbing the precipice seemed simple, and he did not even have any memory of it in his consciousness. However, if he had not learned from the Buddhism sect and the devil's doctrine, he would have fallen to his death. It could even be said that if it were any other powerhouse in the knowing destiny state, he would definitely fall to his death under this precipice. He paid enough attention to the divine halls of West Hill, and thought that he had made sufficient preparations. However, when he entered Peach Mountain, he realized that he had underestimated the 10,000 years of Taoism. This was the lowest cliff plateau of Peach Mountain, where ordinary divine priests, deacons, and cavalrymen of the divine halls of West Hill lived. The warhorses' stables were also here. Under the cover of the night, Ning Kai came to the side of the stables. He did not release his psyche power to frighten the awakened warhorses. Instead, he did what he did to the big black horse years ago. He did not hide the bloody aura of killing countless horses, so that the warhorses did not dare to make any sound. He stood on the east side of the stables, because the imperial court spies in the divine halls of West Hill had found a small pot of leftover porridge here. If they wanted to find that idiot, they could only wait here. After a long time, there was still no sound. The awakened warhorses chewed the night grass and looked at him confusedly, wondering who he was waiting for. Ning Kai was not anxious. He stood in the stables and waited quietly until the clouds gradually dispersed, the moonlight fell, and the morning light appeared on the horizon. Then he was sure that he would not be able to wait for that night. He rubbed some dirt on his neck and sprinkled it into the straw on the east side of the stables. Then, under the disgusted gaze of the warhorses, he walked to the cliff plateau. Before the first light fell on the divine halls, he made the emblematic gesture of Buddhism and went back to the clouds along the precipice, back to the peach blossoms all over the mountain. That night, he continued his adventure of climbing the precipice. He also waited at the stables for a whole night, but still did not see the idiot. He went again the next night, but was still disappointed. He was still disappointed on the third night. By the fourth night, he had become very familiar with the shocking array on the precipice, and his mastery of the emblematic gesture of Buddhism had become more exquisite. The night journey that used to be extremely dangerous had now become a very common process. Therefore, when he walked to the east side of the stables, he even had the mood to gently hum a few songs. It was the song that the old man from the sweet potato shop in the small town hummed. Then, he saw a big black horse on the pile of straw on the east side of the stables, its 4 hooves in the air, and its back kept rubbing against the straw. It looked extremely funny, and he laughed. The big black horse smelled a familiar smell. It rolled on the ground and stood up. It looked over vigilantly, and its eyes suddenly widened. It was so stiff that it seemed to have forgotten which hoof to step first. Ning Ke walked over, hugged its neck, stroked its mane, and patted it hard. The big black horse opened its mouth, rolled its thick lips, and bumped his head. Ning Ke let go of his hand and brushed the straw off its back. He said, "Where did you learn these dirty habits? You are not youngest uncle's donkey." The big black horse thought that its dream was to become the existence that ruled the wilderness like Mr. Donkey. It originally wanted to be the second master, but who would have thought that it would become a prison horse of the West Hill Divine Palace? Thinking of the miserable experience these days, it wanted to neigh, but did not dare. It could only open its big watery eyes and look at Ning Ke, looking extremely wronged. Ning Ke sighed and stroked its head. He said, "I know she has changed, and it is not because of the reason. Bear with it a little longer, and I will see if I can change her back." Hearing this, the big black horse's mood improved a little. Then, it seemed to think of something and blinked its eyes, as if it wanted Ning Ke to be more ruthless. Ning Ke moved closer to its ear and told it his plan. The big black horse's eyes brightened as it listened, and it nodded repeatedly. It thought to itself that Ning Ke was indeed its real master, who could come up with such a shameless and lowly plan. Although the mistress was too powerful now, and Ning Ke could only fail no matter how shameless he was, it was still a good thing to think about in his mind. After the discussion, Ning Ke and the big black horse agreed on a time to meet again, and they parted for the time being. He walked back to the edge of the cliff and walked down along the precipice. Now that he had mastered the emblematic gesture of the Buddhism sect, he could be a little distracted while climbing on the precipice. He casually glanced at the top of the Peach Mountain. This glance contained the Zen meaning of go chanting, so he was not worried that it would trigger the tactical array of the precipice. However, he forgot to go chanting, and there was a second explanation, not the kind of explanation of go chanting. So when his gaze fell on the dark divine hall of light on the peak, he could not suppress his longing for someone. There was nothing there, but he felt that he saw her. At the same time, he felt a gaze fall on him. Last night's announcement is in front. Students who did not see it can go and have a look. I will try to finish the chapter before 2:30. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. You're tuning into the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.